like, I don't know, bro.
Yeah. Yo, man, some like Amazon is delaying some like people who order like Final Fantasy 7 off of Amazon, which I did. I ordered from GameStop, but I'm scared that GameStop is probably going to do the same thing.
I mean, still keep your order, but like, I mean, there is digital.
Yeah, I know. Sure. I know there's digital, but like, but I want that. I mean, you're still gonna get the order, but they're delaying the release of the order because Amazon is prioritizing like more like medical supplies and like actually like needs for like everything that's going around. So people who order that, like, they're probably just gonna have to cancel their order and go digital. So, and I hope that I can still pick my physical, because I got the digital. I mean, not the digital, the deluxe edition, and I want that physical copy. So.
Well, one rumor is that The Last of Us 2 might get delayed.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't see why any game
want that to happen.
Because of like the whole digital thing, but then again, you know, you still got a lot of people who still buy physical.
What about digital?
No, we saying that some games might get delayed due to the whole coronavirus, but like you can always buy them digitally, but there's still people who buy them physical. So.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to GameStack Live.
Just Mark Cerny, man. I don't know what's with that dude's fucking voice, but he can put me to sleep.
We've created GameStack Live to help level up.
Yeah, that was a little interesting presentation that they did, man. You know, not
well, man, that's what they were supposed to do for the game development.
Nah, it wasn't interesting.
Yeah, I'm doing another stream I'm doing another stream right now for Xbox. So if you guys are watching it, let me know.
Yeah. I'm gonna watch it.
Designed for one, solve for many.
Is it under YouTube?
YouTube and Mixers, GameStack Live.
I didn't get a jacket. Malik just said.
And
yo, Smooth, when I click on it,
I forgot what
it takes me to that PlayStation stream. It doesn't show anything there.
Give it a second. But you don't even have to watch mine. Watch the
What you will create.
Yeah, I'll watch it on the phone.
Is Xbox doing it on YouTube?
Well, it's under the GameStack channel.
Let's see here. I'm just checking out the new PlayStation sale going on. Medieval on sale for $20. That's actually pretty appropriate for it.
Are they showing the Master Chief walking around right now?
Yeah.
The one?
Answer, build, engage your players, and ultimately empower you and your team to create great things.
That is right, Malik. But of course, this event isn't just the live show. In fact, over on our YouTube channel, we've got a fresh, hot batch of tech talks, demos, and a whole host of deep dives designed to get you fully up to speed.
We want to see the tech. We got like literally
we want to hear from you.
Everything.
It was a party in our Discord yesterday with questions for our experts and insights into panel discussions. So jump in and join us. The water is great, I promise. Today is the day to give us your impressions, your thoughts, your questions. Remember, we've got a host of tech specialists ready to answer.
That's absolutely right, Malik. In fact, we had a great question posed yesterday by Mr. Andy Puppy, and they asked, what game development technology has changed the game in the last 5 years? And what studios do you think are at the forefront of game development? Who's pushing the edge? Now on Discord, a user responded, and that's Scipio. To the first question, Unreal Engine. Epic Games is constantly
hopefully we're not waiting fucking like 6 months to finally hear more about the games.
So much.
God damn.
Absolutely right, they have.
I mean, we just still didn't see the console
for free.
I know, that's what's got me kind of worried.
Like me, not like you.
Yeah, there's still gotta be another real, but hey man, at least we can stop all these rumors and leaks.
Now, in response to the second question,
thank God.
Scipio said Sony and Media Molecule are really pushing the limits and breaking conventions.
Yeah, that's why I was really impatient. I was like, yo, just want Sony to come out.
I played it a bit. I played it a bit.
You know what I mean?
Now it was made
like
exclusively for the PS4.
yesterday, you know,
The
facts
audio and
versus
programming
facts.
possibilities are endless,
And then, you know, get back to the games, right?
And team collaboration.
When it comes to like gaming, like this year,
and social environment,
like I'm super, like I'm playing Neo 2 right now. Fire, you know what I mean? Resident Evil.
Now this is just a taste of the chat happening over on our Discord, so come join the conversation.
And we'll have a lot to talk about, starting with a look at how Xcloud used creative innovation to drive Wasteland's 3 development. Then we're going to be jumping into the world of online services with a panel discussion.
Yeah, you can talk about them specs. I'm going to stay here and play the
today
games.
is also the day that we talk about the next chapter in gaming. That is right, the Xbox. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry,
we heard it already.
The Xbox Series X and Project Xcloud. We're going to be talking about that today. We've got a stellar panel here to break down what you can expect from this console right here.
Stellar panel, but I had a selfie session earlier.
I was gonna say, I think
we can't go over there.
I think I'm gonna try.
You're really gonna try?
I'm gonna try.
Oh yeah,
I'm gonna
stay all away from you.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Look at the Xbox
Malik,
Series X.
We're fighting.
You know what? I think Master
They got
Chief
Master Chief there.
I think he's
Let's
gonna tear me apart.
We'll leave that.
Xbox.
So here's the thing. Get it. When we unveiled it, the PC Tower, and it certainly has the same shape.
You fucking corny, man.
The amount of power in there, 12 teraflops of amazing power. I am.
Hey, you know what?
I'm excited. I cannot wait for holiday 2020.
It makes me go, hey,
Halo Infinite with that guy over
buy
there.
Xbox. Oh no, wait.
I don't believe that guy's over there.
I don't
You're just gonna believe? You don't believe?
No, he's not there.
You're just gonna
didn't see him at all.
Disavow.
Yep, disavowed.
Wow.
Anyway, I'm very excited for it.
They're missing in action.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, I know my lore.
But anyway, yeah, the next generation gaming.
I just can't wait to
all
see what
about
Sony's
speed,
doing.
power, and of course,
You need to have something killer out the gate, or
those are the notes. And
they're gonna be
you
in
can
a
go
world of
xbox.com and see the whole
No,
ride,
they-
as well as
you know,
Digital Foundry, who did a great piece on it yesterday. Again,
No, I'm thinking like
Concept
Console
is
Wars,
a
so I
beast.
could
It is
hear all that
amazing.
Xbox guys.
Like, that is not all a look into
play,
the
but I got Halo.
Fine universe we get to look at today, and we're also sitting down with a coalition to talk Gears tactics and their experience optimizing for PC. Yesterday was just jam-packed into this discussion. Never fear, it will be available on YouTube very soon. You can also check out our
I don't think they're gonna have a major first-party game like Day One, like as far as like a Horizon or something like that. It's just gonna be a couple of third-party exclusives. Oh my bad. We're watching more. My bad. My fault.
I think strategy games make you feel smart. I think
this shit boring too,
make you feel
Smooth.
clever. Also like that sense of being like a mastermind.
They got music.
I thought through every possible outcome. If I take that debuff and I put it on him, it combos with his ability. I can proc this passive.
The Xbox Series and Xcloud roadmap thingy.
And then feel like a genius or a fool depending on how it plays out.
Smooth, you have such a delicate way of words. The roadmap thingy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, part of it I think is heritage. It goes back to miniatures. You know, it goes back to play-by-mail games. I mean, they're the really early parts of what made the game's business. Really, it's about using your brain to make tactical decisions and sort of out-clevering
I'm actually gonna take
the
off
designer
soon,
or
I'll be
whatever
here
the
tonight,
situation
man.
is.
All right, that's cool. I'm about to hop out and join another call.
For you,
guys, so
has continued to be entertaining.
All right, man. Later.
But I'll still be live.
I think one of the main things about turn-based tactical games that have helped them to flourish and last long over the years as a genre is that they put player choice front and center. They give players interesting situations, interesting tools, and the time necessary for players to think through and decide the proper course of action.
What a difference a game is. Yesterday, all these PlayStation
You can't play another game that has that time pressure and still feel like at the end I got to think through all the possibilities. I'm the genius. I thought every way this would work out, and then it went
Give us
exactly
your
as
opinion
I
on
wanted
this
it
real
to.
quick before we end.
Who?
My opinion? Smooth is in here.
I'm currently
Smooth is in here.
I'm currently
What's up,
live
Skip?
doing a reaction to the Xbox, the real show. So they're doing the Xcloud show. But bro, like I completely missed. Right, this is what happened. Right, I started to watch it. I didn't understand what was going on because I felt like Alexa was talking to me for just too long. And I just happened to look at my phone, and it looks like Eurogamer had all the specs. So I read that, and all the shit this dude was saying. I'm sorry, all the stuff that this dude was saying on the stream is just didn't mean anything to me. And I'm sitting here, I spent the entire hour arguing with people on Twitter, and I realized, I looked back at my second monitor and realized the screen was black and the stream was over. I'm like, what'd I miss?
Hey, kid, you missed the greatest part of the whole thing when he said thank you.
He said, thank you for showing up. You're not getting any. I told you I'm gonna show you less of everything and more of nothing.
So when do y'all think we actually see something? Because obviously this was not.
It's hard to tell at this point, man. They about to get this work on Twitter, man. They about to get this work on
I say Mayor
Kid
June.
Smooth, you know what the funniest thing about this whole thing is that we were saying before you came in here?
What's up?
That's Microsoft took the exact same thing they just did, but they gave it to other people to make it more entertaining.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the most important thing that happened there.
They're like, Austin, take this. Digital Foundry, take this. Take the knowledge you know and how you've been explaining tech to people who don't know tech and explain our tech to them.
Yeah. Shout out to Smitty Smith, file a super chat for developers. Nah, son, that's not the way it was portrayed.
Bruh, I'm giving people that work. That 13.3, the 12, this, the 11.6. I'm giving people work. I got all these receipts in here.
Right, now we do got to talk about that. It's not about being petty. It's not about being messy.
Oh, it is about
being petty. It's about being messy. You gonna stop with your?
No, this is very much about being petty and messy.
You out here with the politicals.
Listen,
we ain't doing that.
There's a lot of people. Y'all right. There's a lot of people.
Man, I don't be liking this new cognito. I don't like this new cognito.
I'm agreeing with y'all. There's a lot of people talking reckless, saying they're definitely gonna be more powerful. Xbox fans, y'all gonna get this work. Y'all were talking too much. It's on. This was supposed to be the clapback for a lot of.
What did I tell you last night when we
was directly added me yesterday? He made a new account yesterday. He at me yesterday said, "Yeah, you better have that same energy, and you know what it is when they come with that 13. I don't want you hiding and ducking."
You know the crazy thing about it is I told you last night, Cognito, because you was like, I don't know, that dude got that right. I was like, at the end of the day, Diller gave people the numbers to fake stuff like that. When you have someone like Diller that has been right on a lot of these kinds of performance rates, you can take his numbers because they're not official, they're not confirmed, and just throw them in your own.
We all agree with Diller on the Xbox.
Shout out for Smitty Smith with the $2 super chat. I'm being petty and messy. They need these hands.
I get that. All I'm saying is the big mystery was their teraflops, and based on their history in the past of being petty, the old Sony, that would have an old Sony move would have been like, "Oh, word, y'all did this, y'all showed everything." That was the narrative. The narrative was like, "What happened?"
We got JD Gamer for the $5 super chat. I don't care.
Oh, don't we miss him? Yeah.
Okay. I don't care. This was for the devs or me. This was god awful. Now I want those PlayStation fans to keep the same energy and take them L's. Xbox always.
Like I was saying, the energy was like, "Yo, old Sony. Oh wow, y'all showed your hand." That was the narrative, right? Xbox showed their hand too early, and this, to a lot of Sony fan base, was the clapback. So in that respect, yes, it's an L. There's no getting around that.
We're about to end this because I got to get ready for work and stuff. But before we end this, I want to go through this panel and tell me, yay or nay. Key, what did you feel about that presentation? I know you secretly was over there liking that, man. I know you were. You was like.
No words. All I got is lights. I got this. This is the HDR ray tracing.
Let's give them the GDC pass. What did you think?
Oh man, it was. That's a challenge. No. It was. This stream was for. This would have been a good stream if it was at GDC. But once it got canceled, the stream should have got canceled. It should have been something completely different, and I can't get the last hour back of my time that I just wasted on that.
And let me get Dizzy real quick. Dizzy, everyone in the chat asked to be in here but Kid Smith. I invited Kid Smith. You didn't ask. You literally could have said, "Yo, give me an invite." I would have sent you one, but we're gonna move on with this. Death,
we got Brad. Hold on, we got a Brad super chat.
They can wait till after we go through everything. Death, how did you feel?
Oh, sorry, I just woke up. I mean, I'll just say it was a presentation. There we go.
Speechless.
He said yeah.
Kid Smooth, yay or nay?
On the presentation?
Yeah.
It's a nay. It's a nay. Like I said, I stopped paying attention to it like 10 minutes in. It was horrible.
Okay, I don't even want to ask Cognito because he on that middle ground stuff.
He on that middle ground.
Scream. What do you want, Scream? Did that convince you to buy a PlayStation?
So did you hear they have an SSD?
Did you hear? I heard for 20, 30 minutes.
Kid, no, that's not what I asked you.
Yo,
I asked
gotta
you, did
go,
it
guys.
convince you to buy a PlayStation?
Later, King.
Later, King. We'll see you Sunday.
You're gonna see me. You gonna see this tweet right now?
Well, did they convince you to buy a PlayStation off that?
Who did that to? Who did that for you?
It's a simple question.
He's interested. He's still interested.
If you think about it, about the length of these games, so this game's maybe 50 or 60 hours. What is that? Every Star Wars film ever made end to end? There's more information than any one human could know inside of these products. So you gotta wrangle this big beast and make sure it comes in tight.
We build big games and we build complicated games, and we could make our lives a heck of a lot easier if we would just narrow the scope of what we would do or make different decisions along the way. But we love these games, and our fans love these games. Interacting with the community and interacting with the fans through builds that we give out to them or through forums where we get input from backers, that has helped us distill down what we want to preserve and protect and is non-negotiable about the franchise, and then also look forward to the areas where we think we can really innovate more in.
Wow, what an incredible journey. And here to talk more about it, please welcome Tim Campbell and David Rogers. Gentlemen, welcome. How's it going?
Hello, how are you?
I am doing very well. How are you?
Doing killer,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, obviously now, as you can see, everyone, real quick, we're practicing social distancing today with our interviews on Microsoft Teams.
So that's
thanks again for being a part of that. And we're going to be doing it a little bit differently, but it's live, you know? I heard some comments yesterday.
And they saying that's overclocked.
Perfect. I'm super excited.
It was
now,
9.2?
let's kick things off. Actually, before we even get started into the questioning, tell us about who you are and what you do at In Exile.
So I'll start off. My name is Tim Campbell. I'm the game director on Wasteland 3, and I just help wrangle the project, everything about it, the moving pieces, to make sure that it's on track and it's turning out to be as great of a game as possible. And a lot of times that involves just working with the different development team members, making sure they have what they need, making sure that there's nothing blocking them or obstacles in their way, and just making sure that everything is running smoothly.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'm David Rogers. I'm the lead designer. I work with our lead systems designer and our lead content designer and our writers to really make sure every element of the game comes together in something that is fun, and the kind of in charge of the game actually being fun. And so I'm one of the few people on the team that does what most people think game developers do, which is just play the game a ton and then complain. And so I'm in that really enviable position.
That's awesome. Two very important roles on the team. And it's funny because you mentioned it just there. People think that all you do at game teams is just play games, which is somewhat true, I guess. And I love the fun factor, making sure that's in there. So we're going to get into all of that because I thought, again, that piece was super awesome. But I want to start off with the storytelling. What do you all think about your development story that we kind of just saw in Save Game? Tell us a bit about that.
I thought it was fantastic. I love that you guys put it front and center on iteration. That is at the core of everything we do at In Exile. With games that are as big and interconnected and sprawling as we make them, we have to be playing them constantly, and we have to be iterating as fast as humanly possible. And Brian touched on it in the video. Iteration is everything. If you look at the game quality, what players actually play and what they experience, everything that they're going to come away and love is from iteration. It's due to us being able to play and test and refine and just home in on the fun as quickly and as consistently as we can.
Yeah, and so David, I would love to dial in on that a bit as far as the iterative process. What is it about it that appeals to you so much? Like when you are iterating on a thing, what are some of the things that you're looking for?
Well, I don't know that it appeals to us as much as it's the only way to arrive at something that is truly fun and polished. And I think that's doubly true for big sprawling RPGs like ours, where as opposed to making Street Fighter, for instance, which is a beautiful game, that's a purely systems-driven game. You don't have to worry about, oh crap, how much money is the player earning each time they beat Vega, and then what kind of gear are they buying, and how does that influence their power, and then what's the power curve across all the fights. There's a whole other side of this that means that I can't it's impossible to test a level in isolation. We can't just hop into a level, load a default party, and then play, because if somebody changed the cash reward of a previous quest, that changes what gear I have, that changes my power level. Everything is so wildly interconnected that I would love to hear a better way to go about it, but the only way to really make this game fun is to just play it over and over and over again, and like play it from the start. Play 20 hours, make a big list of changes, fix them, and then start over from the beginning, and then play 25 hours, and then start over, and then play 30 hours. And you're kind of like crawling through this game, just trying to make everything as balanced. And, the game is, people say 50 or 60 hours. God, I hope it's that low.
Yeah. Well,
it certainly feels huge.
I'm wondering, though, so this is an interesting question maybe for both of you, but especially for David. With that, iterative process, and you're playing the game over and over again, how do you prevent yourself from sort of, like, how do you have a fresh perspective? How do you know that you're not getting into a spot where maybe your opinion is fogging up the development?
That's a really good question.
I don't know if there's like a good solution other than it's just kind of something that you learn. It's like you kind of can force selective amnesia on yourself, or it's you kind of understand the tiers of strategy. I use, like, Witcher is a really good example that I think everyone it's really popular, so it's a good example to go off of as opposed to referencing Wasteland 3. In The Witcher, for instance, there is the standard combat system, but then there's the crafting and like magical like potions element. And that's required to play that at a higher level difficulty. So you can kind of understand, like, okay, I'm starting to use ability combos right now, and I know on normal mode for a standard player, they probably wouldn't be using that. So I have to pull back. And so, like, by kind of diagramming the complexity of your game and understanding, like, the tiers of strategy that someone might engage in, you can kind of purposefully shut those off in your brain, or like actively say, like, I'm not going to use this strategy tier or during this playthrough because I'm trying to test it for this user set. But you have to have a really deep knowledge of your game and your systems to kind of know how to diagram that, how to break that down, and kind of what strategies you have to extract from your own play style in order to simulate that kind of player.
Yeah, this is a trap that it's very easy for us to fall into as developers, because we're working so long on one feature or one level or one fight that we can just kind of get numb to it, right? And we can maybe make it work as we expect it to, with all of the context that we have in our minds that players might not have. And then if we just put that in front of players, they wouldn't necessarily understand it, or they might have friction and get hung up or confused by things. And so we have lots of different steps that we take to try to fight against that. We have regular playtests where we kind of have some people, including Brian, head of the studio, step back and just play through the game like a player, right? And just make funky parties and make funky choices and just test out the game for fun, right? As opposed to testing it for raw functionality. And we also do things where our level designers or other people on the team might do peer reviews, where a designer who's spent a lot of time working on one level may swap that level to another designer, and then they kind of can look at each other's and provide fresh eyes and fresh insight. And so this is the sort of thing that every single day we're trying to fight against, so we don't just get numb to, the things that we're trying to polish out of the game.
Yeah, super important thing. And again, this whole show is about creating an optimization for developers. And so I think that knowledge is great to share. So Tim, from you as game director, how do you, outside of the iteration process, how do you really optimize the game development? Because, you have things like dates that you may have to hit, you have, features that you have to get for review. How do you really go about making sure that everything's moving along?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of it is the iteration, but there are different things which feed into the iterative cycle, right? Sometimes we get data. Sometimes we get information from whether it's support departments, QA, or backers playing an alpha or whatever. And those comments and those bugs and all of that feedback kind of funnels back into the development team. And then we kind of sift through it all and assess what things are actionable, what things are not. And then we'll prioritize things and then move them into the development queue for the team to work on. And so on one hand, we're working against our own instincts and our own plan internally and iterating against that. But then we have this funnel of just additional information that's coming through. It might be from people, elsewhere in the dev team who aren't on our project, but are playing the game with clear eyes, or it might be coming in from data from backers or elsewhere. But it all comes in and directly affects how we build the game.
Okay, that's
there's a couple of really good sources of that feedback that we've been utilizing. So one is like at this time in particular, we recently just released our beta. And then a little while back, we released an alpha build. It went to Gamescom. It went to our backers. And so whenever those things go out, like we're glued to Mixer. We're glued to YouTube. We are watching streamers just play through it. And I love how streamers play because they're trying to entertain the audience.
Yeah, Aaron,
but
Planet
to do
Xbox
that,
is
they
taking
are
place
just,
tonight. It's
like
going to be an
taking
open
their inner
podcast,
monologue and they're
PlayStation
just
guys,
blurting it
Xbox
out. And
guys.
so
We're
every
going to be talking
little
about the
like,
Xbox
totally.
Series
that
X
sucks.
versus
I can't believe
PlayStation
that.
5,
I had
of
a
course.
95% hit chance. Why did that not work?
A lot of
Like
information
every
to
little
go
thing
over,
that bugs them,
please
they
tune in
blurt
tonight.
out really
It's gonna be
loudly.
between
You know,
8 and 8:30
and then furthermore, what's been really useful for super detailed, super actionable feedback has been the Microsoft Usability Lab. We took our gamepad. For instance, we did a first pass iteration on gamepad. Okay, we think this is pretty good. We know there's some jank in there, but like the general ideas are there. And then they throw it to, sometimes they throw it to 6 experts, or they'll throw it to a couple, or they'll bring in like laymen from off the street who just, they just signed up because they like video games. And I can watch them as they're pressing button inputs on the gamepad, and I can see those lights up. Like if they're having an issue with like, oh, they can't access this menu, I can actually see what they're pressing. And they have like PhD research experts there really parsing out like not just like what are they doing, but like how do I ask questions to them in a way that won't guide them or prime them so we can really get like the purest form of their experience out. And those end up being super, super actionable. I love working with the usability lab.
Yeah, that's been super helpful for development. I mean, it's been invaluable. Of course, the developer in us like always cringes when we see a streamer, hitting a bug or we have to put something that's maybe still partially raw in front of the usability lab. But every time we do this, we just get real world feedback coming in from players that is super invaluable because they're coming at this from a different perspective. And we really want our game to be playable by a wide range of players, not just people who are hardcore or people who are tuned into the franchise previously. And we really want to open this up. And so being able to get those fresh perspectives really influences a lot of what we do.
Yeah, and so
there's a lot of ego management that goes on. It's so tempting to go, it's not ready. It's not ready. I'm positive we could just ace this test. If you just gave me like 6 more weeks, they won't have any feedback. It'll be awesome. But who knows if your feedback, the stuff you would do is even in the right direction. So it's like you have to be like, I'm going to put something crappy out there. It's bad. I know it. And that's the point. And you have to embrace that.
Yeah, and so I think I always like to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, actually, let me ask you, do you think that game development is more difficult or is it easier now because of that constant one-to-one feedback? Prior to this, you kind of had to put a game out and you had to see what people thought. Now, to your point of having streamers, you get their instantaneous reaction, and you don't know if it's like super based in what's actually true or if it's just, as you said, a reaction. So how do you see the development process in that sense?
Would you rather get poked with a nail every day or have someone break your arm like at the end of the year?
Yeah.
It's like getting that constant feedback is like they're poking me but I can kind of react to that feedback on the fly and hopefully avoid like in the olden days, you put it out. It was a Hail Mary that you threw and then the reviews would hit on launch day and you were like, oh man, we made something bad or good. And I didn't really have a good gauge on that up until now. And now you get like a lot more pings back from the audience, especially because we were a FIG-backed game. So we have people who are really passionate, who are constantly kind of keeping us in check. Hey, are these features in? It's not running on my computer or whatever. And so that's kind of the olden days you just delayed that pain, and sometimes it was a lot worse. And now I think with the feedback, your ego gets hit a lot more often. But then it's actionable, and you can actually like avoid a much worse fate.
Yeah, I think the answer is both. Honestly, it makes our lives easier in some ways and harder in others. We just released the beta, like Dave was saying, and immediately we saw some streamers hit some things that we're just kind of cringing about, right? But getting that feedback absolutely helps, and I think is critical in today's day and age. Getting fast feedback and wide perspective on your game is hugely helpful to shipping a quality product. I think the flip side, though, personally as developers, it's a bit of like walking the gangplank a little bit in that we're putting something out in front of people that's not the shipping version of the game. It's still raw. There's still bugs. There's still rough edges. And you have to have thick skin going into it because that there are flaws still and kinks that are getting worked out. So I think we we need to kind of gut check ourselves a little bit more as developers and get comfortable with that. But the end result is better for the game and better for players.
Yeah, and I imagine communication is part of that, right? Like really setting the expectations, especially in that beta phase, I should say. So what are other sort of tools that you would, or maybe, suggestions you would give to small studios
hurry up. I forgot
that could help them as they get started in the development process?
I'll take the first stab at this.
Go for it.
So something that's, and this happens right at the start of your project, and it's something that's really easy to do. If you take a game designer and you lock him in a closet for a year or something, and just give him like a word processor, he or she is going to attempt to think of every edge case and solve every problem ahead of time. And then it's really kind of, we've fallen into this trap in the past. So I'm speaking from experience. I've done this in the past, that you kind of over design right at the start of the process. Maybe it's because you don't have enough engineers online or whatever the ramp up process is. And then you have this grand design that's ahead of you, and then you kind of get married to it, and then you insist that like, hey, none of your feedback is valid until all of my concerns and all of my edge cases and all of my systems have gone in. It's very easy to fall into that trap because you feel like you thought through everything, when really the best way to go about it is like, what is like, and people say this all the time, but it's hard to stick to. What is minimum viable product? What are the core pillars of our game? Like in Wasteland, I need to be able to talk to people, make decisions, and shoot. And you could do that in a single level. And until those elements feel good, it's like, why are you adding a crafting system? Why are you adding customization system? Why are you doing all of this stuff until your pillars have really been solidified? And then also get a minimum element in, because the path to fun might look a lot different once you're in it. Then, you could build a basic shooter, but there's a really wide gap between PUBG and Fortnite from like a game systems perspective, from a feel perspective. How do the guns operate? How does loot drops operate? All that stuff. And those two games feel wildly different despite being in the same genre. But you might not, like, you might implement phase one of like, this is what I think a good feeling gun would feel like, and then that kind of informs a lot of other decisions as these knock-on effects. How the gun feels informs how healing feels, informs how your classes are set up, all of that. So it's really, do not over-design early on. Just get the bare minimum and then start playing it, and then start making those smaller decisions along the way to creep towards something that is fun, and make sure each iterative step that you're taking kind of makes the game progressively more fun.
Yeah, I completely agree. These games tend to expand over the course of development as systems get fleshed out, as developers add in these neat ideas that come up along the way. I mean, it's dough that rises, right? So my advice is, even if you are trying to build a big RPG kind of like this, start small. Start smaller than you think you need.
I wonder what happened to the
Expose as
remastering
much of your game systems to designers so that they can iterate and tune and try out crazy ideas without taking other departments down every time they want to see if something's fun or not. And just get the game playable as early as possible, playable internally by your dev team so that you can have those iterative cycles, and playable externally so that you can get those perspectives. I mean, ultimately, one of the things that we've seen true over and over again is that 90% of the polish comes in the last 10% of dev time, because you spend much of your dev cycle just getting the game to function, getting it to work, getting it to hang together, get all the pieces there, that it doesn't leave a lot of time to polish. So anything you can do to kind of stretch that last 10% of the dev cycle, either by pulling in iteration earlier or by trying to stretch things out further, that is directly going to impact the quality of your game. And I think that comes back to iteration, getting the game playable early, and keeping your focus tight.
Oh, these are some great tips. If I were a developer, these are the tips that I want to know. So let's go deeper into the Wasteland 3. Obviously, strategy game. Let's go very specific to this. In the save game doc that we just kind of saw, you all talked about some of the fundamentals that you're trying to implement as far as a strategy game goes. One example was, focus on the actual player's turn, because if you focus on what the enemy's doing, that can suck them out of the experience. What kind of tips would you give for someone building a game that's similar to yours?
I think it's easy to get bogged down in the minutia of like the mathematics of the game. You know what I mean? Exactly how are actions spent? How much does everything cost? But you really need to focus. like Wasteland, going from Wasteland 2 to Wasteland 3, for instance, was a real exercise in figuring out what were the fun and impactful decisions that the players were making and what were these superfluous decisions the players were making. For instance, do we require the player manually reload their weapons at the end of the turn? No, it's kind of a rote action that we can just automate because it's not a meaningful, like RPGs are about decisions, but you can kind of take that at face value and just give people total control, but then you end up with, and not to bash it, it's cool for what it is, but like Arma, like just legit Arma, has like 110 little commands. I can control every little aspect of my character, but are all of those actions really super impactful? And then so for our game specifically, like we want to automate everything that's not a real decision that's going to impact the world or impact like the course of your character. So like another good example is like when a character goes down in combat, we're just going to automatically revive them at the end of combat because at the end of combat, there's no time pressure. So you're just going to walk over and revive them anyways. So can we just save you that effort so that you can really be focusing on decisions that matter? And I think a side effect of that is it makes it feel like all your decisions matter even more because we've made sure the only decisions you're making are the ones that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more on that. You just have to keep the player experience front and center, right? And we want the player experience to be players making interesting choices as much as possible, as consistently as possible, and then seeing reactions to that. And so what you have to do is, I think, keep that focus at all times, check your decisions against it, and be ruthless about editing out anything which doesn't further your goals and make that user experience better, right? Anything that you are developing just because it's something you like as a developer or that somehow was a holdover from previous versions or something that does not contribute to the player experience is basically a tax against your development effort that makes it harder for you to really polish the things that do matter. And so I think just consistently checking what your design is and what your game is forming up to be, and then kind of paring back and trimming out anything which doesn't help support your core goals is really essential.
Where is it?
That's amazing. I mean, I feel like the key word there is making sure everything's meaningful, right? Whether that be everything in the development process or the actions that the players are taking, like making sure that you're very deliberate, which is fantastic. And so this entire thing has been about process, and I'd love if we could end it on actually. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us and kind of talking us through this process, because I think developers are going to be able to take some really good stuff away from this as far as game design and of course game development. So again, thank you so much for joining us and practicing social distancing with us. It's been fantastic. We're actually going to now go over to Rikari and we'll see what he has. Who knows?
Appreciate you, Malik, and that's right, it's time to talk about you, specifically what you're saying on Twitter and Discord. You've been talking so much that our channels were truly excited. And we've collected a few of the questions that you've been submitting, and now it's time to catch up on the answers. So, as I go through Discord here, actually that talk there was just great, and in that bit, this one came through.
Right, so there's an interview
for
an hour
Mysterious
that says how online
on Mixer
services
said,
are
I normally don't
defining
like turn-based RPGs, but
game
this
development.
looks awesome.
Honestly, guys,
fully agree. Like, who
I'll be
knows what
streaming,
sort
but
of
I'm not
game that
gonna
you would
sit
like.
there and
Don't
sit through
judge a book by its cover. Give it a shot. Like, that's all I can say there. Let's go through the rest of them. What do we get? I think Xcloud could be the most massive improvement in gaming history. That's from Magic Mart. This is another one that was in Discord. An interesting side note, I found using the DirectX toolkit to be a really good way to learn C++ programming because I already knew basically what it did and how to use it because of previous experience with XNA.
I don't need to be here, but
and then last one, going back to that talk that we just had, a good quote, a great quote for real. Would you rather get poked with a nail every day or have your arm broken at the end of the year? That's easy. That's a nail poke. I don't want to break my arm. And I heard we have a few tweets that we can actually get thrown up on the screen. So let's do that and I'll read them out. This one from Structed. You missed GameStack Live yesterday. You want to rewatch it? Hit that link. Go check out the recordings. That's aka.ms/GameStack on demand. And our next one here from Dust Scratch. The talks on accessibility from GameStack Live, including Gears 5 as an example, were great to consider in future projects as a game dev developer. It's difficult adapting for as many players as possible, and seeing case studies helps inspire all of us to be more inclusive. Thank you for that note. And this one from Select Starter. GameStack Live Instant, what it means to run a game studio, conversation with Turn 10. We appreciate you for sharing that out. For those of you that are watching at home, go to GameStack.com, and if you hit the check it out on GameStack Live, there's a link to the Discord, and I'm sure we can get that thrown up on screen at some point too. Join the conversation, get in there, we want to hear from you. Or use that GameStack Live hashtag, reply to the Twitter account we got set up, get those comments and whatnot in. All right, well now it's time for our first panel of the day, but first let's check out this short clip all about audio design from the Coalition.
When we talk audio, generally people think, as you say, VO, sound effects, music, but there's a lot of tech involved. We thought, let's really take this seriously on Gears 5 and start from the ground up with accessibility in mind. If you're going to put sound in, make sure it's sound that's important. All of these questions started getting asked, like, what is an important sound? Which sounds should be higher priority than other sounds? Gears of War is a very complicated game. There's a lot of sounds coming at you at once. So one of the things we wanted to do anyway was to make that easier to understand. So we wanted to assign priorities to sounds and then give them a higher or lower priority ranking depending on how important it was to you. Even though it was a lot of hard work, the outcome would be a much more controlled mix. We work with our code team to implement features that will help us with our mixing. And so based on the AI and where you are in the game, we have these values that come in, and then we can assign those sounds from that particular enemy to be higher priority. And they're actually some of our priority mix settings. So you can see actually if I'm in line of sight, that red arrow is on me. Some of these numbers here changing our user cone and priority settings. There's a lot of ducking going on here. So that's actually, my weapon is actually turning down other sounds in the game. People with impaired vision have shown that they can play Gears because of this. We have a few people that are actually almost blind that play Gears, and they use the sound cues to let them know where things are coming from, and it's spatialized and coming from a certain direction. It's a bit of tech, a lot of software, a lot of code time, giving us values that we could use to tune the levels and volumes. The actual result of that is just that the mix is clearer, it's easier to understand, and you can hear where things are coming from.
Online services are an integral part of the next generation of game development. And here to tell us more, we have James Trott, Christina Parker, James Gwertzman, and Jesse Jazanov. Thank you guys for being here and joining us.
Hello.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, we got all four of you here, so please let me know if you guys have any other additional opinions if I don't call out to you. It might be, I'm afraid we're going to talk over each other a little bit, but let me know if you have anything that you want to add. But before we continue, guys, we want to hear from you, the viewers at home, and how you have harnessed the power of online services, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. So jump into our Discord and tell us all about it. Now, yesterday we discussed the state of the industry, and you can check out that last segment on our YouTube playlist, including all of our segments that we've had soon. But we're going to pick up from there. And I'm going to start this off right now with Christina. How are online services playing a role in the evolution of modern game development?
Well, I think that they've been really impactful on modern game development. It's not that you just play a game and play the game for 10 hours and you move on to the next game. It's elongating the life cycle of games. Players and game developers alike are expecting these games to last much longer and become more personal to the player. So,
James, I know I got to talk to you yesterday about live ops, and I want to know more about your opinion on how online services are playing a role in evolution. If you could just reiterate a bit more on that.
Yeah, it's exactly what we just were saying, that as games become communities where players are going to be in there for the long haul, it's not enough to just ship code down to the client and leave it there. You've got to have engagement between players. You've got to have the opportunity to do updates and edit the game on the fly. And all of that requires things that live out in the cloud on servers. Probably the biggest area where people think about it first are for sure multiplayer games. Just the technology required for a player to play against another player. You've got to do matchmaking. You've got to be able to manage chat conversations. You've got to manage all the moves so the players are coordinated. All of that's going through servers in the cloud and require those services. And no one wants to build those for themselves from scratch. You want to be able to use where you can off-the-shelf tech that's proven and tested. Because when games fail on launch day, more often than not, it's because the servers just can't keep up with the load. Because it's the hardest thing in the world when you launch a new game And often your biggest day is the first day you put it out there.
James Trott, is there anything else that you would like to add there?
Yeah, I think services have kind of extended the lifespan of games for developers and changed the way the industry thinks about shipping games and shipping content. Now with live services, developers are able to create little micro packages of content, stream them into their games. Even small indie games like Cake Bash or Celeste are able to make micro content tweaks or small additions to the game over time, which substantially increases the lifespan of that game for the developer and the player.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, James Trott. And again, to Gortzman, this is something that we were talking about before, that lifespan of a game has really grown and expanded, not just with multiplayer online games, but with RPGs as well. And Jesse, I want you to talk a little bit more about that. Why is it that we're seeing more of these games kind of adopt these online services?
Well, I think I'll point out also, it's not just the live operations, but even before the game is launched, people are testing different types of content via ads and click-throughs with different audiences with tools like Facebook or other online ad networks. So people are getting a better read on what the audience is like or have affinity for. I also think as people start adapting games to different surfaces, like mobile, for example, you see latent demand unlocked as they figure out better UX systems. And those UX systems can be figured out because you're running A/B tests with audiences to see what resonates, what makes people stick, when do they drop off, all those things. So I think it's going to change how fast things evolve and which platforms are able to be reached in a way that's actually delightful to customers.
Well, Jesse, can you talk a little bit more about that, relying on audiences a bit more for not just feedback when the game launches, but beforehand? How has that changed? How has developers communicated with audiences during the development stage?
Well, I think you saw this early with like the advent, maybe like a decade ago with Facebook games. People could run really small tests, and even without gameplay, right? Like you can have an ad that goes to a survey, and that ad gives an expression of what the game could be. And if people just completely vomit on it, you don't have to waste your time building the thing because people hate it. Or you can say, oh, wow, like I have an idea that people like the game, but here's a bunch of different variants of art styles that I can test with it. Which one resonates with the audience I'm targeting? And then that can lead, like I said, to a survey where you can get other information about what people want out of the game. I think you combine that with looking at verbatim feedback with actually player behavioral feedback as well. And oftentimes you'll see a discrepancy with what people say and how they behave. Those are usually the most interesting cases where you want to dig in deep and find out what's actually going on with your community.
Christina, how important is that for developers being able to get that instant feedback? How does that impact development?
Yeah, it's kind of like what In Exile was just saying about iteration. It's the earlier you can get that feedback, the better that you can make your game for the player at launch. And live services and a live ops game kind of exist pre-launch. You really want to test and build those muscles ahead of time, and getting players in, running those experiments helps build those muscles for developers as well.
James Gortzman, I'm going to focus on you, but if anyone else has any opinions on this, please let me know. At a high level, how would you define online game services?
Sure. So any time the game is reaching out and taking advantage of code that's not running on the game client or running out either on a server or in a cloud, that's an online game service. Some services are provided by the platforms themselves. So if you're building a game for Xbox, you may be using our Xbox Live services, which provide things like matchmaking and some multiplayer tech. If you may be taking advantage of services like PlayFab, which are available across all platforms. So, for example, PlayFab provides analytics or a feature where you can gather data from the game and put it into a data warehouse in the cloud, so you can do analysis and reports to help understand what your players are actually doing. And then some game services are part of the game itself. So, for example, some games may actually, multiplayer games especially, or maybe mobile casual games, may have code that's running in the cloud, sort of simulating the game, even when a player is not connected, so that when you connect back up again, the game is continuing to live and thrive. I guess an MMORPG would be a great example of this, where the whole world is continuing to run, even if the player is not connected to it.
Right, that's true. That's true. Anyone else have any other opinions on a high-level example of online services? No, I'm going to take that as a no. Good. James Trott, I want to know a little bit about game streaming. Is it a service or is it kind of a separate platform? That seems to be a lot of questions that gamers are asking recently. And how does this change how developers think about game services?
I think it's both dependent on how developers want to consume it and integrate it with their game. Originally, streaming was very definitely sort of a separate service. It's more of a media service where you're able to stream gameplay and things like that. But you're seeing developments now in the industry, and it kind of started with Mixer and their Mix Play functionality, where they were able to bring interactivity into the platform where viewers can interact and influence the game. There was this game called The Darwin Project that allowed you to give power-ups and bonuses and rewards to your favorite players in an arena kind of brawler. And that brought a new level to building community for the game and let the viewers interact with the game even before they've ever played it, support their favorite streamers, and grow the community around that game.
Jesse, I want to ask the same question to you about streaming services, or is it a separate platform?
I actually think it's a complicated answer. In the one hand, if you're streaming from a racked Xbox or something like that, it's really you're programming to the same surface. However, the consumption of that output is being consumed on a screen that could be something completely different than you're prepared for. So think about things like font sizes and other things, usability, a touchscreen versus a controller. In a console environment, it's a very controlled experience, right? You assume the person has controller, you assume they're connected to a television. I think with streaming, while technically it gives you more reach per your sort of technical effort, you still have to consider the UX, and that also opens up a whole nother can of worms in terms of like, how do I acquire customers? In a traditional console game, especially box retail, is just brand marketing, right? Now you can actually buy ads on the console. But once you're streaming to mobile devices and mobile endpoints, if you think about the ad ecosystem there and performance marketing, it opens up a whole new way to acquire customers that can actually play your game now almost on any endpoint. So the idea that you can reach a massive number of more people and have actually a way to engage them through performance marketing is actually going to be really, I think, interesting in its impact on the industry.
Christina, is that why? Oh, sorry, please.
I think another way in which game streaming services like Xcloud are going to change things that we haven't really anticipated yet is actually on the iteration and testing side. So we were just talking about, in the last session, talking about how important iteration and speed of iteration is. And actually, when you're building console games today, one of the slow parts of the pipeline is getting your game up onto your console so you can test it. Downloading the bits and uploading them every time you make a small change. But if you imagine streaming where you're building your game in the cloud and playing it off the cloud, you can potentially speed up that iteration time and give the game creators even faster feedback loops while they're building new content. And I think we're only scratching the surface. We're just now starting to realize how that notion of streaming off of cloud services to play, not just build, can also impact the dev experience.
Well, James,
there's a lot of.
Oh, please, sorry again.
There's a lot of other different things too. Like just to build on what James is saying, I think when you often have different versions of your game in the wild, whether it's because of an A/B test or because you have a critical update, you don't have to rely on users to update their client. Once you update the cloud, it's updated for everybody. So that actually makes it a much more controlled environment for devs in a lot of ways.
Well, James G., going back to what you were saying, like this is really just the beginning of online streaming for the cloud. What's next? How can it go bigger from here?
Gosh, I think one of the big questions is starting to look at truly massive multiplayer games. So one of the areas that I've often thought we have opportunities around is open world gaming. And so you look at a game like Red Dead Redemption. The team that built that game spent an enormous amount of love, blood, sweat, and tears building the world for Red Dead Redemption, and it's essentially being used right now for one game. But starting to ask ourselves, what if you take that world and open it up as almost like a platform where other games could be built inside the world of Red Dead? That starts to become almost like world as a service. We have a new flight simulator game coming out later this year in which the entire world you're flying around in is actually done through machine learning algorithms building off of satellite data. So we actually are flying your airplane through the real world as recreated from satellite imagery. I think this notion of vast new areas and worlds that we can play in is going to be really interesting, and that's a service that we don't have today. Game world as service we haven't yet seen. I think we're going to start to see that.
Christina, I want to know your opinion on game streaming as a service compared to it being a platform and how it's been impacting the game industry recently.
Yeah, I really agree with James, where I think it's a bit of both, where it's definitely a service that we provide, and it's also a platform for new developers or for a different way for a developer to reach a different market or a different platform. It's building for mobile when you might not have necessarily had that as a platform previously. So I think going forward, it's thinking about, and also kind of what Jesse was saying of how quickly you can access it. So I think it's both. It's about building for platforms you might not be used to as a developer, but it's also about thinking about how quickly players can access it. And what does that mean for player behavior? And what does that mean for the games you're making?
Have you seen changes in player behavior?
Not me personally yet, because I'm still really new to the game streaming side of it. From game services, though, it's definitely been change in player behavior about even in player expectation for live games. And I'm interested to see how that evolves as game streaming becomes broader.
Well, then let's talk a bit more about...
I think one change we've seen in consumer behavior is you no longer have to download and install the game to play it. And so the ability to basically go from a friend to saying, hey, I'm playing this new game and it's great, check it out, to basically saying, hey, I'll try that out, taking the invitation, one click, and a few seconds later, you're playing the same game, no install time. That, I think, really will start to change consumer behavior, and it will start to make it easier to grow a new audience around a game. I also want to comment, I was talking earlier about how streaming is changing the development experience. Now that a lot of us are working from home because of the COVID-19 virus, you start to realize that things like dev kits, which are often expensive and hard to move around, hard to bring home with you. And so in a world where you're able to move more and more of your development to the cloud, it starts to make it easier to have a remote team and or be working from home, which is something that, sad to say, we may have to think more about in the future.
James Trott.
Well, it's not even just.
Sorry, guys.
I was going to say, it's also labor markets are also inherently immobile. So enabling you to actually access talent in other parts of the world actually makes this a lot easier too.
But James Trott, I want to go off a bit about what James G was saying there, that the difficulties that game developers are starting to see there. What difficulties have you seen?
We've covered a lot about the test cycle, and things like live streaming allow that dev test loop to kind of go around and around much quicker. James is right with the unavailability of physical dev kits, and with the number of platforms that are introduced through game streaming, whether that's mobile devices, consoles, handheld, PCs, it's expanding the test and developer surface. One of the cool things about those dev kits being part of that streaming experience and available through the cloud is we exist in this world then of kind of develop anywhere. And so the development experience becomes develop where you want, using the tools you want. You can even develop in the cloud and have real-time feedback through a streamed instance of your game. So you're able to effectively live debug or live edit and fine-tune aspects of your game thanks to that streaming service, coming straight down to your test device.
We actually have a question from our Discord channel. If you guys are watching right now, want to be a part of the conversation, please hop into our Discord, or you can post it into our Mixer chat. But we got a question saying, in a world where working from home is becoming more key, an example, isolation, what's the biggest challenge to ensure collaboration and keeping on track? Jesse, I want to start with you.
Wow, the collaboration, keeping on track. I think it all comes down to really how good the tools you have are, right, for communication. Do you have live video? A lot of human communication deals with looking at body language, microtransactions in the face, tone, and actually the words you say, right? So with voice or text, you just have the words. With voice, you have tone and words. And with video, you have some notion of like seeing. So I think there's so much information that's conveyed that you're missing out on if you don't have like a physical view of the person. I think that's the biggest challenge. And I think I always say, I was saying to someone yesterday, if I were an IC dev just writing code, I'd probably be twice as productive. And if I have to have like a bunch of meetings with a bunch of different people and schedule them and get them in with connectivity and stuff, it actually makes things a little more challenging. So I think that's how I think about it.
No, I definitely have to agree. This interview alone for me has been a bit challenging, trying to figure out who's going to talk next. Christina, have you seen any challenges recently with what we've been going on with this self-isolation and working from home?
Yeah, I think it's a lot what Jesse was commenting on as well, about how it's really difficult to take dev kits home. And so therefore playing the game regularly and iterating on your software can be a bit difficult. And it's about that collaboration. Game development, software development is very collaborative. So you don't have that face-to-face interaction with the partners on your team as much, and playing together quickly and working together quickly is very important, and that can be disrupted from working from home.
James Trott, I'm going to ask you the same question, but I also want to ask a second part to this, that have you seen any benefits from working from home?
So one of the biggest challenges is remembering to maintain those touch points and those collaboration points that you would normally have with your team. When we're physically co-located or we're scheduling meetings and we're meeting regularly, there are a lot of kind of touch points and water cooler moments where you might sync with somebody or exchange information almost implicitly. As you move into this distributed remote world, that kind of goes away. So you have to remember to reinforce things like daily stand-ups, take time to connect with team members, over-communicate, and really share as much information as possible about what's going on in the project, what's going on with you. You have to kind of proactively project that information out into however you're collaborating through something like maybe Microsoft Teams. In terms of benefits, I think Jesse kind of hit the nail on the head. There's also a lot of implicit disturbances that happen in the workplace, people coming by to ask questions ad hoc. And it really gives you time to kind of focus and engage with the work and crank out a lot of code and do a lot of building kind of work by yourself, thanks to that kind of isolation and that clear boundary.
James G., do you feel like you have less distractions now, or do you feel like this isolation is a bit more of a hindrance?
Well, I think, the joke going around is all my friends who are introverts are loving this and my friends who are extroverts are hating it. And I think there's truth to that. Those of us who are in collaborative roles are basically having to be in video calls all day long, and it's definitely more taxing than being able to sit in a physical room with people and have a meeting. But those of us who are individual contributors and are happy to basically close the door and just crank, are really feeling more productive. I do think those importance of those daily huddles and those social get-togethers are important. And some of my teams have actually been getting together once a day to get on the phone and just chat about social stuff, no work talk allowed, because those are the kinds of informal chats that are not happening. Back at PopCap Games, when I used to work there, we had some key designers who were off-site. And one of the side benefits is it forced a lot of the key design discussions to happen through text chatting, which meant there was a historical record. And so one benefit of moving to remote work is that it forces all of us to use tools that have there's more of an archive function now kind of built in where we can go back in time and see what was happening. And we may find later that actually proves to be a benefit versus when you're all in the same office, you can often cut corners and maybe not document or capture some of the key discussions you're having.
James Trott, what would you say are some examples of games that are using online services really well today?
Well, we saw a lot about it yesterday, but for me, one of the kind of best-in-class examples is Sea of Thieves. They've really taken live ops and analytics to the core of how they build and maintain their game, how they balance their economy, examine player behavior, and how they evolve that next generation of content for the game. End-to-end, Sea of Thieves uses gaming services to enrich the experiences for the player, real-time in the game that they're playing, and in every iteration of content that they produce and publish.
Christina, is there any games or developers out there that you see using online services really well?
Yeah, well, he stole my answer. I was going to say Sea of Thieves, but I also think Supercell, which is mobile developer of Clash of Clans, they do a really great job having live services embedded from the very beginning and embedded in their studio culture as well.
James Gwertzman, this is actually something that we wanted to talk about yesterday, but we didn't have time to talk about it. But I think that we can kind of follow up with this question here, is that it seems like different genres of games use online services differently. Can you tell me a little bit about how online services affect those genres, from its MMOs to MOBAs to mobile games?
Yeah, absolutely. I think mobile games, are relatively new to console and PC developers who are starting to figure this out now. But in the world of, for example, MMORPGs, the genre's had this since the days of MUDs, 30 years ago. And if you look at mobile games, a lot of mobile games, especially free-to-play games, had to have these services baked in from the beginning in order to run a free-to-play game, or else you're simply not going to make any money. You're not going to be able to survive as a game studio if you haven't figured that out. So I think mobile game studios have had to evolve and use services well ahead of these more traditional AAA developers. Zynga, for example, which started actually doing sort of social gaming and then social mobile gaming, they were one of the earliest leaders in sort of online services here in North America. But what they were doing was actually several years old compared to what was happening over in Korea or China.
Jesse, I want to know your opinion on how different genres are handling online service differently. And it definitely seems like more and more game genres are starting to pick up even role-playing games, which we were used to just, you release the game and then that's it, you get nothing else. How has it evolved?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you're streaming and when you're racking up server costs from running live services, every minute of engagement now is a minute of cost. So if you have a fixed price once and no other way to monetize players, eventually, if they've loved your game enough for years and years, you probably end up losing money, right? So you have to think of it like a true service where there's a cost to running the service and charging customers fairly. I think, you look at some of the genres that have come through sort of social and mobile, they've been really light in terms of the production value, and that's been getting better. And I think, again, I think the latent demand over time for figuring out how to adapt certain genres to be effective service-based games and effectively run on different platforms. Look at Pokemon Go. I think there was latent demand for capturing a Pokemon, as many generations of people always wanted to do that, grew up with it. And then finally, when you were able to, there was this groundswell of people running around finding Pokemons, which kind of right now, given COVID, we're in the bizarre opposite world of that. But I think, there's a potential for these genres to all be adapted, and they all will, right? I mean, I think game developers are sharp, they're passionate, and they will figure out how to best adapt these genres for online play. And I think you can look at the ones that haven't really been adopted yet. Some of them have actual physical limitations. Like an RTS, playing that on a mobile screen versus a giant high-res monitor gives you a distinct advantage, right? Yeah. On the high-res monitor. So I think certain genres, the ones that are turn-based, designers also have to think about snack-sized gameplay. Like even if I can bring the couch to you with streaming on your phone, I may not have a gap of time long enough to experience that. And I think there's going to be a lag where AAA developers realize, hey, players are playing this in different places. They need a way to engage with a meaningful amount of progress or good feeling about the game or positive interaction that's short enough that they can fill those pockets of time that people are right now using for things like Words with Friends, where you take a quick turn and go, right? Maybe that's an extreme example, but still, it needs to be like a 5-minute experience that you can have. You can't always have time to sit on your couch, even if I can bring it to you.
No, Jesse, I kind of want to follow up a little bit on that and something that you mentioned, Pokemon Go, which was quite revolutionary. My mother, who's never played Pokemon or seen Pokemon at all, was playing Pokemon Go. So what kind of revolutions are we seeing in gaming right now similar to that online services has brought to not just the gaming community, but to the world as a whole?
Well, I think that's one good example. I think, another one of the things that James talked about earlier, which haven't really happened yet, but I expect to happen, you're seeing like massive worlds that you're able to fill up easier, right? When you think about streaming as well, the ability to just jump in without a download, that'll lead to like ad units and things like that as well that are new and novel. I think
I'll jump into one.
Being able to provide. Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, take Roblox, for example. Roblox and actually even Minecraft are really fascinating in that these are games that are themselves creative tools. And you see user-generated content and sort of player-generated content is becoming more and more important in these games as communities. And it used to be only mod makers were in there making content. And it was an active part of the game, but it was still a small minority of the players who were also creators. And in the case of Roblox, they've got millions, literally millions of games on their platform now created by, in many cases, 8 to 12-year-old kids. And so I think that notion of game player as also creator is a neat shift. And you're starting to see more roles of emerge as you shift to services that give you, as a player, more opportunities. You're no longer just having to play. You can stream, you can create, you can consume, you can buy, you can chat. There's a bunch of more ways to engage.
I think I have a slightly also different view on that, which is I agree with everything James said, but I would also say people talk about UGC. I think the most ubiquitous form of UGC is actually just multiplayer. The fact that you show up to play against somebody, you're providing UGC that if you weren't there, you'd need a bot for, right? So it's the most natural way to do UGC because all you have to do to provide your content is just be a player. And so I think multiplayer is like the most base level of UGC in some sense, if you think of it that way.
Yeah, definitely. We have a question from Mixer again. Do we need such a powerful console in cloud gaming and streaming is the future? From Magic Mart 8. Let me ask that question again. Do we need such a powerful console if cloud gaming and streaming is the future? Oh, okay. So they're asking, why are we seeing bigger and better consoles if it seems like we're moving towards streaming services?
Right. I think it's an and. I think, you always have to pay for the console somewhere. And so if you choose to buy the console and pay for it up front and have it in your living room, then it's yours and you can have it for the life cycle of your enjoyment of that platform. But in the case of if you don't want to buy the console up front, or if you want to have it on devices like mobile phones or PCs when you're out and about, then you need to stream it. And now you're basically paying effectively by the hour. Now, there may be subscription services, there may be hourly fees, but ultimately it's now changing that from a one-time payment into an ongoing stream of fees. And I think that's fine. It chooses sort of how you want to access it.
Christina?
What streaming will do is it will open up the world of gaming to a much broader audience. And so the hardcore gamers will still be buying consoles, and we're going to have the best, fastest, most awesome consoles for people who want to have those experiences. But we now have this opportunity to provide that same experience to people who may not want to make that upfront commitment. And there, I think we're going to ultimately grow the world of gaming, and that's great for all of us.
Christina, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with what James is saying. I don't think it's necessarily an either-or situation where you have to have a console up front or you do game streaming. I think they provide different platforms, different types of gaming experience. And for some gamers, they'll want both. For some gamers, one will work better than the other. And I think it's about providing the accessibility and the options to the player. It's empowering the player to play however they want to play and access the content however they want to.
James Trout, something that Christina said there, that maybe players will want one or the other. Which players are going to focus on streaming services compared to game consoles?
I think it really depends on a couple of things. Number one, super high-speed internet isn't ubiquitous. It's becoming more widespread and prolific, but streaming services still rely on a certain amount of bandwidth to deliver the gaming experience to the end device. Also, for people on the move, people traveling, people who prefer that mobile platform but with maybe like a richer experience, stream services are great for them. I also think we're going to see a move to a world where it's very much an and. When you think about a console comes with an expected price point and a certain size and form factor you want it to be able to fit under your television. And there's only so much hardware we can fit in there. There's only so much that can be built in at a price point and a size that makes sense in the home scenario. When you think about something like a cloud where the resources are by the second or by the minute, the amount of compute power that you can bring to video gaming experiences to do things like cloud rendering, where your gameplay and maybe procedurally generated scenery are rendering in real time on the cloud and being delivered to your console, where your console is focusing on audio, gameplay, effects, particles. You're basically able to bring as many consoles as you want to the fore to deliver the gaming experience that you envision.
Now, this is just kind of the question that I just asked, but we have another question from Discord. If game streaming services are the next big thing, which it definitely seems to be going in that direction, what about people that don't have access to the internet? Jesse?
Well, if you don't have access to the internet, you can't really stream games, but you also can't play any multiplayer games. So you're not, I mean, whether you're streaming it or playing it locally, you're not playing Fortnite if you're not on the internet, right? I mean, you just can't play with other people. So I think the penetration of stream games has to match somewhat the map of the connectivity that'll support it, right? I think over time, though, you have 5G coming. There's costs with that. People on Wi-Fi will get it for whatever the base cost is. I think the internet is spreading rapidly. There's lots of people on the internet, and I think it's just a matter of time. But yeah, some people, if you don't have internet, I think you're just out of luck.
I want to shift our discussion a little bit, and Christina, I want to ask you this first. Tell us a little bit about the trends that we're seeing with game development and the use of online services.
Well, I think the trends for game development, it's kind of on that iteration that In Exile was speaking about, and testing your services sooner and getting feedback from players sooner and incorporating that into the game development process. It's no longer that box product mentality or games as a product where you put it out and you're done. It's starting much, much sooner in the development process, testing your services, getting out to players, getting iteration, and incorporating that into the whole process to get towards games as a community.
James Trott, have you seen any other trends?
What I start to see with developers now is kind of a new way of approaching development, whether that's for streaming or whether it's with the cloud. They're starting to think about how to pull all of these things into their games. And they start to think about, especially as you think about streaming, you start to think about how that runtime moves around. What runs where? Does it run on your device? Does it run in the cloud? We also see people thinking about a new kind of procedural content where the cloud is constantly running simulations and updating content without developer interaction. We worked on a project with Microsoft Technologies last year for an MMO-like system for bosses that learn player behaviors in raid encounters. So as raids go on and people find dominant strategies, the bosses adapt in near real time, detect the strategies players are implementing. And now the challenge for developers is becoming how to tone back that machine learning and simulation given the amount of compute in the cloud so that the NPCs and monsters aren't perfect, because with enough training and enough compute, they will beat the player every time. You kind of have to dial that back. And we're seeing a lot of interesting things happen with genetic algorithms where the content evolves based on a few base principles into something new that the developer may never have envisioned. And that brings another set of challenges for them to solve.
That's incredible. James, I want to ask you a little bit of a different question. We were asking the trends that we're seeing from game developers. What are the trends that we're seeing now from players? Has that changed at all in the last 5 years?
Yeah, I think players are frankly expecting more now. Players, I think, used to be okay with the idea that, hey, I'm going to go and buy this game and I'm going to play it and enjoy it and basically consume the director's vision. And maybe if they didn't like the ending, they would go online and rant about the ending. But they didn't really have a lot of power of development. Now, with these games that are being continually updated, players have a much louder voice. I like to think of players as sitting at the design table alongside the designers. They're no longer sort of across the table. And so with that power, also comes responsibility. And game developers have to figure out how to listen to players and incorporate feedback and adapt games for what's working without necessarily completely pandering and losing their artistic vision. And so there's definitely a mix there. One of the game studios that we work with is called Colbiri Games. They have a very simple game called Idle Miner Tycoon, which is one of those idle clicker games. They released the initial game version in, I think, 6 weeks of development. And then they proceeded to have an update every week, or even in some cases twice a week. And they just updated and updated and updated and iterated over time. And they grew that game to quite a level of success. And so you no longer have to you really can release now a much simpler experience and sort of see what's working with your players and adapt and iterate around that and build your way to success that way.
This is a word that you guys keep on saying, iterating and updating. And we have a lot of developers watching us right now. How often should a developer update their game? Is there really a rule of thumb with that, James G?
No, there's no rule of thumb. It's going to depend entirely on everything from their appetite, the genre they're in, the nature of their players. I think the mindset shift, the culture shift, though, is that every game developer is going through this culture shift of I am now and is always updating, always ongoing experience, and just getting to that mindset shift we've seen as anywhere from 2 to 6 years for traditional developers who are used to doing it more the waterfall model. But that's okay, and as we get there, as the whole industry becomes more fluid, we start to see new experiences emerging.
Jesse, I want to know your opinion on that because I feel like you got one.
Yeah, I think the answer to that question is faster than your competitors, to put it simply. Because if you have a game in the same genre as your competitors and you're updating weekly and they're updating daily, the learning cycle that they're having is 7x yours with the player base, you will die. Like that's basically it, right at the end of the day. So I think, and if you look at what's happened with performance marketing, game companies that actually have high LTVs and can tolerate a timeline where they can invest cash, like a working capital cycle, longer than you. They can just blot out the sun, basically, to put it in like 300 Xerxes terms in terms of buying ads, and you can't breathe. So I think operational agility is really critical for operating these games. And if you can find something, the best insights are ones that are not widely known. Like you find something that's counterintuitive about the audience, and you can actually use that to grow the audience because you can buy for a period of time, but eventually people will figure it out because they'll deconstruct your game and catch up. And so it's a constant battle. It's actually really, really difficult and brutal. I think anyone that's worked for mobile native for long enough has experienced this, and this is coming to console and PC, in my opinion.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Do we need to expand on what performance marketing is? That may be a new term for some developers. I think it used to be, you put the game in the store, and that was your marketing. And maybe you buy ads, but that was about it. Performance marketing is this idea of running ads, where the ad is directly clickable to get you right back into the game and to drive an install. And so this notion of paying for ads has a certain amount of cost for every new install you get. And as long as the cost to get a new player to install your game is lower than the revenue you're going to get from the player over their lifetime, then you're ultimately profitable. But if you're paying more to get a game player to install your game than you're going to make from that player, you can't run your business. You're going to ultimately go out of business. And so there's a fine line there between what your cost to acquire a new player is and what your revenue from that player is. And so you've got to keep these balanced.
Yeah, and to put a finer point on what James was just saying, I think for companies that have a lot of money and large war chest, they can afford to spend $1 and then say, hey, in 12 months, if we get the $1 back, great. A small company may say, oh, we're living paycheck to paycheck. We can only afford to keep that money tied up in marketing for 30 days. And so ultimately, the other company can bid higher than you. And that's actually like a problematic, right? With performance marketing. Creates an additional challenge that hadn't been present before this.
Right, which pushes the onus back on online service. To bring it back to our topic, it brings it back to online services, because if you can make your game more viral and make your game more organic growth, where players, word of mouth is taking over and encouraging your game to spread, so you're not relying on paid ads, that's how, as a smaller studio, you can still survive. So your bigger, more well-funded competitor is buying up a bunch of ads, but if players are telling each other and installing your game organically because it's just a better game and it's more compelling and has a more rapid, adoption loop, then you can still compete.
Christina, I want to know a little bit about your opinion on what these two were just saying and focusing on ads with like player retention and how much money they're willing to spend on it. How important is the marketing side of online services?
I think it can be very important. I mean, it's the top of the funnel. It's a lot of where acquisition for your user base comes from, unless you have that virality K factor and you're getting the organic growth. People hear about your game mainly through ads, mainly through marketing. And then it's all about getting people into the top of the funnel. And then once they're in the game, having that really compelling game loop that retains them and keeps them in there. So without that top acquisition, you might have difficulty bringing people through the game.
James Trott, anything else to add?
I think one of the things that developers need to think about in this online services and kind of iterative world, as you said, is to think about it more like an evolution. Jesse kind of hit the nail on the head with that kind of more frequent than your competitors. But the important thing to remember is that your players are coming to enjoy and immerse themselves in the experiences that you're creating, and taking an evolutionary view to how your game evolves over time where you're taking data in from platforms like maybe Azure Analytics, PlayFab, where you're getting that real-time view into your player behavior, into how your game is performing, into changes you might want to make, and then taking things like Azure DevOps, our app services to do blue-green deployments, which is this idea of changing the deployment of your services so that you don't interrupt the players playing. I think where a lot of developers go wrong is they take their game offline to make it better, but all the time that they're making it better, their players aren't able to enjoy it and they're losing time.
Well, James Trott, is that a shift that we're going to be seeing? We're going to see that less often because of the streaming aspect?
I think as you get into streaming, it becomes even more important, because if someone's playing your game streamed to a device, they don't want a spinner to appear like, please wait, update loading. They just want to keep playing. And so thinking about those strategies for changing content, changing configuration, PlayFab configuration management is just amazing for this. You just change little tiny details underneath the player, and it just realizes itself in your game. What James G was talking about earlier with world as a service is going to make this even more prolific, where the world is able to change and evolve because that's being streamed directly into those games, those gamer experiences.
I want to shift focus.
I also think.
Oh, please.
Oh, I was going to say community is actually really important here too. Supercell, someone called out, doing a great job with online services. I think they also do a great job communicating with their audience and giving them a heads up as to what's coming. And I think when games don't do that, you see things like Marvel Contest or Champions where like audiences can revolt, and that's something you didn't see before online services as well. So communicating with the community from the developer actually really important to make people feel like they know what's coming.
To follow up on that, Jesse, do you think that there is a possibility of too much communication?
That's a good question. I think communication, no, because it doesn't really impact the gameplay, and people can choose to use it or not. But you can update too quickly. I've seen people get overwhelmed with content. I think this happened a little bit in Farmville. If people feel like they can't keep up and they're overwhelmed, they can drop off the game. And so I think you have to find that right balance. And even you may have different segments within your game that are hungrier for more content and some that may feel overwhelmed. So the trick is being able to update it enough that you're actually learning as fast as you can, faster than your competitors, and delighting your audience in all the segments that you have uniquely, which can be a challenge if they're all in one shared game.
Yeah, personalization. So I was going to say personalization is a theme that we're going to see more and more of. It's one of those online services is your ability to target different experiences to different players. Because if players just come in for the first time, you do not want to overwhelm them with the same experience that you may be offering a level 80 player who's been in there for 2 years. And so you have to be able to adopt your curves and have different game experiences for different types of players if you're going to have a game that's going to have a long time life. When a game has been around for 3 years, 4 years, you simply can't expect a new player to have the same experience by any stretch as a longtime player.
I have a differing opinion about the communication. I actually believe you can communicate too often with your players. Depending upon how often you're communicating, you could be diminishing the message that you're sending through and diluting that. So you want to make sure that your players are reading your messages. And sometimes if you get too frequent, they can get burnt out on your messages. So you have to be really careful. And I think that comes into what James was saying of personalization. So the more you learn about your players, the more that can come into your communication as well. And you can give them targeted information that's important to them so they know that when you're communicating with them, that it's something that they should read and that they'll care about.
Jesse, I want to shift topics a little bit. As a platform and also as a service provider, what has Microsoft been doing to make game-specific services better for game development?
Well, I think for starters, it's really listening to developers, trying to get a diverse view, not just from internal studios, but from also external partners. Trying to actually make it simple, trying to really make it simple to see what you need, and either we have it for you or we have an answer for you with a partner if we don't in our stack. And I think just trying to be clear. I don't know. Maybe James has a better answer with PlayFab.
No, I think you nailed it. I think as a platform provider, we're just continually listening to our game developers and really trying to put the developers first and saying, what do our developers need to be successful? The mission statement. PlayFab is now part of an organization here at Microsoft called the Game Developer Experiences Organization, and we have as our mission statement empowering game creators to realize their dreams. And it may sound a little bit hokey, a little bit highfalutin, but we take it pretty seriously. We really see ourselves as helping game creators be successful. Microsoft's mission statement is essentially empowering everyone to achieve more, and change everyone to developers. And that's very much what we try to do. That's why I started PlayFab, 6 years ago now, is because I'd been a game developer for 20 years. I saw the rising curve of technology making it harder and harder for small studios to compete in a world where online services were not just useful but critical. That it takes a lot of capital to build great online services at scale. And so, I see what we're providing and by harnessing the power of our cloud to help, even the smallest indie developer studio compete effectively on an equal playing field with the biggest studios is critical to keeping, innovation and creativity alive in our industry.
James Traw, I want to ask you the same question on how Microsoft is impacting these game-specific details for game development.
I think Microsoft, and especially with PlayFab and the game developer experiences team, is really practicing what we preach. And a lot of what we're talking about here, we use every signal we can, whether that's sentiment, feedback, or analytics in our own services to see what's working and what's not, and really turn the dial on what will work best for game developers. I think it goes a little wider than game-specific services too. A lot of the services that across our cloud offerings, across our analytics, our storefronts, our live ops, just for regular software, the biggest corporations in the world use these services, and they're available in such a way that whether you're an indie developer or a AAA, we have an offering that will allow you to maximally realize your vision, and we're constantly tuning for developers of every type. Like James said, Microsoft's mission is to enable every person on the planet to do and achieve more. And we do that by listening broadly and actioning that as quickly as possible with our own iterative cycles, growing our services, growing our presence, listening to the features that developers need, and allowing developers to build the game they want with the tools they want on and for the platforms they want. And that's how Microsoft is approaching this all up.
We've been talking a lot about the high level, but I actually kind of want to go to the basic level of this with a lot of developers, maybe not even really knowing what PlayFab or GameStack is. How would they become a part of the Microsoft experience here with all the tools that they're using? James G.
Sure. So, go to GameStack.com. The team has built a really good website that has a lot of entry points there, saying depending on what kind of developer you are, what you're looking for, you can think of that as almost like a roadmap to all the different services Microsoft has, which can be overwhelming at times. So from GameStack.com, you can go into deep diving on PlayFab. We have playfab.com, which is a website specifically for our online services offering. Azure, of course, has this vast set of services that you can tap into, everything from your raw compute and storage and networking services, all the way up to some pretty cutting-edge machine learning and AI techniques that are available sort of off the shelf. We use Azure Cognitive Services inside of PlayFab to do things like real-time language translation and real-time closed captioning of audio streams. So there's some pretty cool technologies there. And then, of course, you've got our various platforms. We've got PC, we've got Xbox. It's a whole bunch of different materials specifically for those platforms that you can tap into.
And who can use these platforms?
Everyone. We literally are making our services available for everyone, from the smallest hobbyist or two-person indie shop all the way up to working with some of the biggest AAA studios in the world.
Well, that's awesome. How have these services come to define the development of future games? What are game developers doing differently today? And Christina, I want to talk to you on this.
Yeah, I think I touched on this earlier. I think it's about starting sooner in the development process. Services have always, from at least an online game point of view, have been something that's been needed to be created to support the game. But it's bringing other services online earlier, and it's using them earlier. So it's like I said, it was about iterating, about putting content out there and getting feedback and building on those services and building on the game using those services.
I'll jump in. In the early days of this online services space, you had to build the services at the same time you built your game. And so you often didn't have a chance to test your game with the services incorporated until the very last minute. And oftentimes it was too late to make changes at that point. But now that a lot of the services you need are available sort of off the shelf in a turnkey fashion, you can start to incorporate them very, very early in your development, which means the game itself is really built around those services from the ground up, which is a much more cohesive and integral experience. As a small example, Bethesda is launching Doom Eternal tomorrow, and we're working with them to power some of the services for that game. And we've been working with them for a very long time now. So when that game ships, it's using a lot of services powered by Microsoft that are going to be pretty compelling.
Jesse, is there anything else that you're seeing with developers that are using online services differently today than we did 10 years ago?
Primarily, it's kind of what I said earlier, which is they're just getting earlier feedback from customers and more frequent feedback from actually the player base. And that's enabling them to make better decisions. You don't have to project out what content, 50 hours into the game, or they're going to need a year from now, because what's going to happen is you're going to set up a system so that you can actually get that data, get your your feedback in a structured way, combined with what you're hearing from players, like in forums, with how they're using the game, to make better decisions about which content you're going to use, which extends the life of your game. And that process, like someone else mentioned, starts literally at day one now. When you're saying, hey, should we use this theme, this art style, that art style, you can start actually getting a pulse of your players super early, and that's actually really helpful. And I think it will impact the number of games that are going to be viable, which is positive for developers and players.
James Wertzman, do you have an example of how game studios are using these services today? And I know you just mentioned Bethesda, but is there any other examples you have?
Yeah, I mean, our own first-party studios are fantastic early adopters. We talked about Sea of Thieves. I think Sea of Thieves is a great example where they started with one kind of game experience, and they've been actually sort of learning and adapting the live ops mentality themselves over the course of that game being live. So if you look at Sea of Thieves today, it's very different than when it launched 2 years ago. They have way more live events now. They have way more content updates. They've taken a more iterative approach to the kind of weekly cycle. Whereas in the beginning, I think they still had more of a waterfall model of longer gaps of time between their big updates. I keep talking about the Flight Simulator game. To me, that is the perfect example of a true cloud-powered game now, where we've taken our existing Flight Simulator, which is a well-known, beloved legacy product from Microsoft, and now we've coupled it with not just the cloud, but like the cloud on steroids. We're taking satellite data and machine learning and AI techniques, and that is a game that literally could not exist without the ability to stream content off the cloud in real time. The game's going to have real-time weather conditions. The game's going to have real-time updates based on the world changing, and I can't wait to play that. That's the top of my kind of must-play list, and I've been working closely with the studio building it. Super excited to see that come out.
James Trott, I kind of want to ask you the same question, but a little bit differently. Are there any games that are using these online services that surprised you, that you wouldn't think they'd be able to use them in their development process?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time over the last year talking to a lot of our ID at Xbox partners, small studios that are building independent games with Microsoft for Xbox and other platforms. And I'm always blown away by the variety and the kind of ingenious ways they find to use our services. One of the early questions that I used to get a lot was, well, okay, I get it, Microsoft has this game stack, but what does it cost? And across the stack, especially for the small developer or just starting out, to get those signals and start trying these things out, the answer is free. Azure has tons of free services. Azure DevOps, GitHub have free offerings. PlayFab has a free offering. You're able to get in and try these things at minimal to no cost. And they're able to do incredible things with a very, very small amount. Things like managing currencies, doing digital delivery of like skins, assets, cosmetics, DLC. You can do a huge amount with very little if you're prepared to put in the dev time. And as we move forward, I think we're just going to see more and more of that as indie devs realize that these services are for them too. They can get the kind of insights that Jesse's talking about. You don't have to be a Sea of Thieves to understand how your players are using your game. And you can leverage the cloud to actually offset a huge amount of what used to be the constant update cycle cost of having to ship new builds just by doing dynamic content generation and putting a lot of your assets into a cloud or a cloud service or a gaming specific service like PlayFab.
Jesse, anything you want to add there?
I think that sums it up pretty well. I think we've hit all the high points.
Fantastic. Well, Jesse, how many of these Microsoft's 15 game studios are currently using online services?
Oh gosh, I would imagine all of them. Although I don't know that I've had the chance to meet with all of them yet. But
It's close to all of them. Yeah,
it's got to be all of them, right? In some way.
Yeah.
So if they have achievements, at least they're using online services.
Yeah.
That's incredible. James Wertzman, yesterday when we were talking about our live ops and how does that integrate with other online services that we're talking about here, because live ops and online services aren't the same thing. So how do they integrate together?
Yeah, I mean, live ops is actually more of a set of cultural practices and design practices that a team goes through. That's how I think of it. So good modern teams practice live ops as a way of keeping a game relevant and fresh and boosting player engagement. To do live ops effectively, you need online services. You need to have live games that have, player-to-player communication and other such gameplay. You need to have the ability to update the game and make changes, the ability to store information about your players and learn about them and personalize experiences, the ability to host communities and the ability to let your players engage with each other, and then the ability to run events and to make changes and test out and run experiments. Collectively, this plus others is sort of the set of practices we call live ops.
Christina, kind of same question to you. Between live ops and online services, clearly not. Is there one that's more important than the other? Should developers be focusing on both of them?
Well, I think it's like what James said. You can't really have live ops without live services. So you need to build those live services or get the PlayFab to help you with those live services, and then you'll be able to practice the culture of live ops. But it's important to kind of start both at the same time. You can't start your live services and then transition to a culture of live ops. Once you've decided that you're going to make a live game and use these live services, you have to start that culture of live ops then, because that's a lot of difficulty that developers run into, is changing that mentality from the box product to a live game to live ops.
We actually got a question from our Discord. How do they envision game studios should evolve to best take advantage of advances in service technology?
It's a culture shift. I mean, I'll start with the culture, which is starting to say, because we've seen this. We've seen traditional studios have this model where it starts with designers. They come with a design, they build it, they ship it, 2 years later, and then they move on to a sequel. Right, that's over and done. And studios that are starting to adopt a live ops mentality are starting with a culture shift that says we're going to be shipping new content every couple of weeks, and start to build their studio around that. So we're going to be learning and engaging with our player base to do so. So we're going to start using analytics and looking at player behavior and start to and often staffing teams differently. So you no longer have just your art team and your design team and your coding team. Now you have a live ops team, and you often have a marketing team. It is not just what the publisher does, but it's an integral part of your studio. And so how you staff and how you organize your studio itself is changing.
I think I was going to say also to build on what James is saying, the idea that the role of the PM and the designer greatly sort of change or evolve in this model, because like I said, with an additional bit of cost, there's an additional bit of cost with each additional bit of engagement. And so designing your game to be either service-based, where you need to have a revenue stream that matches the ongoing cost of operating it, needs to be designed in from the beginning. It's not just like designing a box retail game that you get $60 for and that's it. You have to be very careful about your economy. I think the other thing to consider is if there's player-to-player value exchange in your game, you have a whole set of other concerns to think about. Things like money laundering, right? There's a whole series of things that can now happen with an online game that just weren't concerns when you were just playing it by yourself on a console.
No, I remember the launch of Diablo 3, the auction house there created quite a stir with people essentially doing what you're saying there. Yeah. James Trott, have we seen anything else like that in the evolution of online services?
I mean, we've seen a lot of interesting kind of abuses and kind of interesting workarounds. As we move to streamed content, one of the things that it actually becomes really hard to do is influence the system, cheat, exploit bugs, because everything is happening on the server side. There's been this rule in services development for games for a long time: don't trust the client. We never trust what is happening on the end device. Well, in the streamed gaming world, the only thing coming from the device is the input, and everything else is coming from an online service down to it. So there are significant advantages. With live ops, you're actually able to watch a huge amount of data flow past. And so when it comes to something like an economy, an auction house, or where money laundering or other illicit activity might be going on, you're going to see certain behaviors, and you can instrument and detect that. With a very low barrier to entry, people kind of get into this mindset of, oh, that must be very difficult to do. And services like PlayFab have taken a lot of the hard work out to the point that this is a very kind of point and click, easy to adopt notion to protect yourself. There's no need to be intimidated by any of these things.
James Gwertzman, James Trott, Jesse, Christina, thank you guys so much for joining me here. This was a great conversation. And if you guys are just joining us right now, do not worry. You're going to be able to catch the VOD of this on our YouTube channel later on. I do want to thank everyone here. And of course, thank you guys in our Discord channel asking these incredible questions. But now it's time to head on over to Ricari with a little more from you guys.
All right, I'm back in my corner, right where I belong. Now, before we get to our first indie dev showcase of the show, a reminder that we've got literally a metric ton of technical content on YouTube for you that's on demand, available right now. Now, that content has things from teams like Turn 10. Yesterday, if you caught, Dan Greenwald from Turn 10 joined us to talk all things Forza. You can also check out Shay Goldenberg's talk on Forza Monthly to see how live streaming can enhance your engagement with your players. Not to be outdone, David Paris from Playground Games talked about how they improved the stability of their little driving simulator with From 0 to 1000, a test-driven approach to tools development. Head on over to aka.ms/GameStack On Demand for the full rundown. All right, we've got more great games to talk about. Industry-leading 3D content optimization from our friends at Simply Gone. They'll be showing how their new Python API, can be used together with the Adobe Substance Automation Toolkit to create smooth texturing pipelines. You don't want to miss out on this opportunity to learn from the masters at Simply Gone. All right, now we heard from the team at In Exile earlier today, and now we've got ourselves one more bonus feature. Check it out.
You can playtest a level, kind of. And like in isolation, I'm going to get a debug party that's set to level 15. I'm going to go jump into this thing. That kind of works, but it's really hard to really tell outside of the context of the full game. Like if every single encounter was nail biting, like a really strategic challenge, that can actually have a lot of player fatigue. Like if everything pushes me to my total brink and like my party almost dies in every combat, while any one individual combat, you'd be like, oh man, that was really good. That was crisp. Mwah. But then in the context of the full game, if I had to fight 25 of those in the first couple of hours, that's exhausting. And there's a little bit of power fantasy too. Like in this fight, I actually want you to feel powerful. You are a desert ranger, you're a badass, you're a special operator, you're highly trained. I want you to smoke this group. And like narratively, it's gonna feel really good. We want you to like feel powerful, and then we wanna like slowly challenge you. You hit a peak, you fight a boss, that boss gives you a really badass weapon, and then now you get to like coast down because now I have a frozen ferret rocket launcher. And I'm just, the next like 5 combats, I'm just dusting with this new weapon and I feel like a badass. And then all of a sudden now enemies start compensating and I start hitting some friction and then we build up again.
All right, welcome to GameStack Live. Now, I know you were looking forward to showing off your game at GDC, but tell us about, well, I guess we're going to welcome our guest here, Clayton. Clayton, are you there? All
yes,
right.
I am.
How are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I am doing great now that you're here, of course. Thanks so much for joining us in our virtual setting here. Now, let's talk a bit about your game. I know you were looking forward to showing it off at GDC. Of course, circumstances didn't allow for that, but tell us a bit about Bartlow's Dread Machine.
It's this idea for a game that I had actually years ago. And it's one of those things that, you always have these things kind of like percolating in the back of your mind, things you maybe sort of like iterate on a little bit over the years. And this is one of those. This is something that maybe, over 10 years ago, I had this thought that, hey, what would a video game be like if someone created it over 100 years ago and they made it all out of tin with mechanical stuff? So I started thinking about that, but not just a shooting arcade thing, but the idea that it's like a real game. It has characters in it. They have upgradable weapons. They have a story that goes on this sort of adventure across all kinds of cool locations. And then, again, what would that be like if it was in this sort of giant, improbable device that someone made? And so, after kind of thinking about it and cogitating and doing a little bit of concept work, and I kept tucking it away, kind of putting it in the back of my mind. About 3 years ago, I published a game on ID at Xbox, which was the Voodoo Vince remaster. And I think that's where I finally made this connection that, I could just make this game and put it out on ID at Xbox. So, I partnered with a studio called Tribe Toy that's here in the Northwest sort of Seattle area. And so as sort of like my passion project, we've been working on it for, about a year now. And it's well underway, and we're out later this summer.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I actually watched the trailer, the announced trailer from a little bit ago, and I want to dive into the story. You kind of brought it up a bit of what would it be like if a video game was created a long time ago. There's also an interesting twist that was in the trailer of like the people who played it got injured. Can you dive into a bit more of what all of that means?
Yeah, so the creator of the game was this person I created named Arthur Harrington Bartlow. And Bartlow, of course, was like one of those like misguided people who had the best of intentions. That's his photo over my shoulder.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Yeah, sorry, just beating on everything.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
Great. Yeah, this is my great little studio, so
I dig it.
Anyway, Bartlow creates this machine, and he of course spends everything he has creating it. He thinks it's going to be this amazing success because it's just like nothing anyone's ever seen before. But yeah, it's 1907, so they used live ammunition and live explosives and things like that. So of course, everyone's getting injured, and that's also where it got its name. It was originally Bartlow's Machine of Wonders, and then it became known as Bartlow's Dread Machine. And of course, he lost everything he had. There was a catastrophic fire, and then the notion is that my team and I at Tribe Toy have been kind of painstakingly recreating this thing from old blueprints and documents and things like that. So yeah, that's the notion of what we have going on there.
Awesome, and we're going to get into the premise of the game in just a bit, but I would love if you could describe the play style of the game, because that's something that really caught my eye, and I think that's something that's really indicative of a lot of ID at Xbox games.
Yeah, it is in essence a classic arcade game. I mean, it's a twin stick shooter with single player and co-op modes. And couch co-op was super, super important to us because, I love the games that have allowed me to sit with a friend or a family member and just, play a cool game or go on an adventure together. And that's one thing that we thought was super important, like thinking back on things like, Castle Crashers or, any number of other cool games, even Cuphead, that allow people to sort of like just get together and pick up a couple controllers and just play something just splashy and fun and quick.
Yeah, so, and you're coming into the ID at Xbox Group with a unique perspective, and not just as a partner, but with a deep well of experience in the gaming industry. Now, going back to the creation of Bartlow's Dread Machine, how important is it for you to have a unique premise for a game, especially when it's an independent, like ID at Xbox game?
It's really good to have something that makes you stand out. And in this case, we wanted super accessible gameplay, but the look and style is something that we think really distinguishes the game. There aren't a lot of things out there that just have this sort of purely mechanical aesthetic where everything's got, gears and wires and struts. Everything sort of has this sort of physical justification. I mean, when you get under the hood of the gameplay, if you were to think of it as a Robotron meets Pac-Man, there are little tracks you guide your character along. You have choice and you have movement, but you're also playing this basically a twin stick shoot. So you're just rotating your sticks and you're blasting away at the enemies. So we wanted to make the gameplay super, super accessible. Anyone can just pick up a controller, have a good time. But the little twist beyond that is the fact that the game is still three-dimensional, even though it's sort of like 2D gameplay. We've tilted it into a box. So even though you're playing what you might think of as like an old school like Robotron game, when you tag an enemy that's like opposite corner from like another spot, there is skill. You actually have to like really think about those shots, and you really have to choose things carefully. And then the fact that it's three-dimensional means you get a little bit of thing. You get the strategic stuff like cover. There's objects in the world that you can use to sort of duck behind or hide, but everything's also destructible, including the backdrops. I mean, everything in the game is made of tin. You can ultimately kind of lay waste to not only the enemies, but all the scenery and things you see around you in the game. Yeah. So, I mean, we thought that would be a distinguishing thing that would really make this sort of, we call it delightful destruction. And it was a thing that we thought would really help the game stand out.
I love it. I mean, the look is so unique. And again, going back to that point of seeing ID at Xbox games and just independent game development in general, we're seeing a lot of really cool ideas. And so I'm curious, in this world of maybe, we have the power of, Xbox Series X. We saw PlayStation 5, some stuff about that today. Where do you see independent game development as it stands to like these blockbuster games that are using the huge power of these consoles? And like, where do you see those games like in that space?
I mean, I think it's a big play field with a lot of room for everybody, obviously, and I love gigantic AAA games. But I do think the indie space is where you can try a new interesting idea. You can try something that you always wanted to try, or like with this, something that I just wanted to make for years. You find some like-minded people who maybe think, yeah, that's a cool idea, let's go make that. And I think without taking crazy amounts of risk, like Bartlow when he destroyed everybody. You can try that. You can try things that are maybe a little different, a little more daring, a little more, strange, if you will. And I do think that is where a lot of the great things do bubble up into tomorrow's AAA games. I think where this test lab where everyone can just sort of throw together some stuff and iterate quickly and be bold and be daring with their ideas is one thing you can do, I think, very effectively with a small team, especially thanks to the sorts of tools and technology that are available now. I think anybody can basically make a game who really wants to.
Yeah, let's talk about those tools. Talking about, independent game development, I think there's a allowance for maybe more freedom in what you're trying to do. And part of that is being able to partner with Ideate Xbox. Now, do you have any advice for devs who are looking to partner with Ideate Xbox? And what was your experience like utilizing GameStack?
We haven't used a lot of GameStack yet. That's the new and coming thing, and our game's not out until late summer. So we're still looking at the sort of technology that we're incorporating, into our development process. I mean, we have a lot of our content done, but the question though about like what I would advise someone who wants to do an ID game is, it's part of it's the clarity of what you want to do. Like if you know what you want to do and you know who it's for and you kind of have this idea that you want to, again, try something out that you think would be really cool and interesting. If you have compatriots who you can enlist to work with you, really all you need is to set up what amounts to like a business, and that can be pretty casual. I mean, you can usually just set those up depending on where you live online, and then there's an online application for ID. Anybody who lines up the right resources and signs up for that has a shot. Can make a game, and it can be on all these amazing consoles, all over the world. So it's I guess to me it's more about just kind of like having that vision, being able to drive forward with it, and being able to share sort of like that essential DNA of what it is you are doing with the people you're working with.
Yeah, and so I'm on kind of to dovetail off that question. What has been some of your key learnings? Again, everyone watching, or a lot of people watching this, may be trying to develop a game for the first time. What are some other key learnings that you would share with them to really get them started?
Yeah, I think again, it starts with that thing I was calling the DNA, the basic idea. I think that's sort of like the razor you use when you're
making choices. What's up, everybody? Today, about to start talking about the Xbox Series X and Project
big budget
Xcloud.
games,
That's the reason why I am back.
You can go down various rabbit holes. You can end up spending a lot of time on like really complex processes, or if you
guys still here on YouTube.
I guess what I'm saying is
whoever's on Mixer,
control know your scope and costs. Know what it is you're trying to do. Don't try to go too far beyond that. I mean, it's possible to put together things and get that magical combination of gameplay and technology that everyone says, hey, cool, but it's also very easy to overscope. It's easy to be overly ambitious. It's a thing where I think if you just, again, keep your eye on what that vision you have for that end experience for your players, that will help you really kind of steer things correctly. And when you have a small team, it's easier to do. The communication's easier. Everyone's much closer to the game and the content and the processes. So I guess that's my main advice is to just watch your step. Design smart, design carefully.
Yeah, that focus and that scope is super important. Again, especially when you have a small team, perhaps you're kind of forced to do that in some ways. Now, I would love, your experience. You have a very unique experience and background in the gaming industry, and maybe that's sort of also inspirational. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are as far as independent game development and just Xbox? Anything that you can share with us?
Yeah. I mean, my job, actually, my role is I'm a creative director in Xbox Studios Publishing. So, part of what I do is work with the external studios that are creating products for Xbox. But I go home and I work on games. It's just this passion of mine to still create things and make things, because I feel like that helps me do what I do, and that is to really understand the processes of making a game, what a team goes through, the psychology of what we do. I think it's very easy to get up onto a pulpit and make speeches like I'm doing right now, but it's I see that as kind of as all being parts of a whole, though. I will never stop wanting to make things and to be able to follow maybe a vision for an idea. And again, this is it's such a tremendous outlet. It's such a tremendous platform for doing just that.
Yeah, and you say it's a speech, but I think a lot of people you want to hear from that. You know, they want the opportunity. Yeah, they want the opportunity.
Yeah,
exactly. They want the opportunity to kind of learn from people who've been doing it for quite some time and whose main job it is. And so, you know, just to circle it back to Bartlow's Dread Machine, where can people learn more about the game and where can they find it?
You can just go to www.dreadmachine.com. That's the main sort of landing page. So there are links there to, there's the trailer, there's screenshots and some stuff you can look at there. Also links to the Tribe Toy site. They're a really talented group of developers, super passionate about what they are doing. That'd be the main place to go.
I'm looking forward to the game, summer 2020. I'm telling you, that trailer caught me. And so I really appreciate your insights on, one, making an original idea and also like staying in scope, staying focused. Clayton, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Well, thanks. Really appreciate it. Really awesome being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And now from an example of what GameStack can do for indie titles to two people who play them. Kelly and Ricari, tell me what you got.
Malik, I just got to say, first of all, what an outro you threw right there. Way to make people feel welcome. Way to make us feel welcome too. And yes, we do play our indie games.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think I've played through Stardew Valley like 4 or 5 times now.
4 or 5?
Yeah.
What did you think after the third? That's what I want to know.
Well, the multiplayer got added, and they keep doing the updates, and now you can date Shane. This seems to be just me talking about myself. What about you? What indie games do you like?
You know what's my favorite one? #iDarb. That's the one from back in the day.
iDarb is
It was a little 8-bit #iDarb. Yes, it draws a red box, I believe is what it ended up being called. Imagine like a 2D almost soccer game with, there was this old sludge bit that you're running around controlling a little pixel that is.
I think you're making this up.
I kid you not, it is out there. And as soon as we get our
No,
partner
it
back up to
exists.
speed, we'll get you guys
iDarb.
rolling
Like,
with the
I
rest
did a
of
lot
the
of
show
coverage on
because
that game
I
a couple
see
years
somebody
ago.
who's
Quite a
getting
few
set
years ago.
for our next talk. And it'll be a good time. But if you're at home and you're watching, I want to remind you guys, hop into Discord. Let us know your thoughts, your questions. The show's going on and we're having a ton of fun with it.
We are.
And I still laugh that all this came together last minute. So we hope you're enjoying it too. And if you are, jump into Discord. Let us know how it's going. Again, this event is called GameStack Live because we were all about talking GameStack. We had that bit earlier. Now, yesterday we brought you through some of the tools and solutions that Microsoft has brought together for game development under one family, the GameStack family of solutions.
Robust tools and solutions like GameStack deserve much more time than we have to showcase them from yesterday and today, which is why we've created GameStack.com, an online resource to help you learn everything you need to know about GameStack. Whether you're looking for an out-of-the-box full experience or looking to engage in just 1 or 2 tools from the pack, GameStack has something for every kind of game and every development goal.
And remember, we're in Discord talking all things tech with our tech experts right now.
Speaking of goals, next-gen console gaming has been a goal for many of us in the last few months and many more going forward.
All right, this is it. This is the moment I've been waiting for to speak about the future of console gaming. Let's send it over to Brian with more from Project Xcloud and Xbox Series X.
Right, let's go. Finally. Shout out to you guys. You guys who sat down and watched the first I don't know how long it's been going on. The first hour, 2 hours. Look at this bad boy. Look at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Chief. I'll take it from here. All right. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Ricari. I have the pleasure of helping moderate this incredible panel today. So let's introduce our players to you. First up, we have Catherine Gluckstein, who is the GM of Project Xcloud, responsible for product and strategy. Then we're going to have Jason Ronald, the Director of Program Management for the Xbox platform. We've got Rachel Card, Senior Director of Program Management for Microsoft Gaming. And rounding things out is going to be Chris Novak, Partner and Head of Xbox Design Studio. Everyone, welcome. Cool. Can we hear everybody? You guys on the phone? Can we hear us a little say hello?
Yep, we're here. Thanks for having us. Hey, Brian.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so got a couple ground rules today. Again, everybody, we're doing this live, so this is going to be a lot of fun. But as ground rules, just because we have everybody that is going to be on picture but no video, we're going to do a little bit of listening actions here. So I'm going to be asking questions, and I'm going to try and ask a question directly to a person. So when you guys get that, just give a second pause so we can make sure that we're not speaking over each other, but we're going to do the best we can. So With that, before we get into the meat of the topics, I want to give some context as to why each of you were chosen to be with us today. Catherine, let's start with you. Before Xcloud, you served as Phil Spencer's chief of staff, bringing with you more than 20 years of product experience. How has that prepared you to step into this leadership role?
So firstly, Brian, I just want to say I wish I could be there in person, but as you know, all our worlds have been turned upside down by this crazy virus. And in fact, I've got 2 kids in another room doing homeschooling and my husband on meetings elsewhere. So I'm just fingers crossed my internet's going to stand up. But absolutely, what prepared me for this role? So, really I've spent the last 20 years building a career that has sort of harnessed technology to evolve the distribution, consumption and business models for content. And then about 3 years ago, as you rightly said, I joined Xbox as Phil Spencer's chief of staff. And I have to say, that was an incredible experience. I mean, Phil, as we know, is one of gaming's greats. He might blush if I say that, but to have the experience to learn about gaming, alongside him gave me, incredible insight into where this business is going. And as you know, Brian, we spent a lot of time looking to evolve the Xbox strategy during that period. It was where we stated our goal was to reach the 2 billion gamers on the planet. And we defined our framework as the 3 C's, the content, community, and cloud. And, as you can see, I'm lucky enough now to get to execute this strategy with an amazing team, really get to execute on that 3rd C, the cloud strategy. So couldn't feel luckier.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. Jason, let's go to you. You were part of the core team on Xbox Series X, and before that, you were with the Xbox Advanced Technology Group and Xbox Game Studios. Now, you've had a front row seat to much of the evolution happening in the industry. How has that influenced the way that you lead teams around Xbox Series X?
Thanks, Brian. Really, this is one of the most exciting times in my long history in the game industry. With the introduction of new disruptive technologies, innovative game design, and just totally new ways to engage with players. So I think first and foremost, it's really about listening to our customers. And when I say customers, I mean both gamers and developers. The voice of the development community is absolutely critical to everything that we do here at Team Xbox, and it really kind of shapes where we take the technology and the platforms that we deliver. And as a platform builder and designer, our role is really to empower developers to deliver on their creative visions, but by providing them with the best hardware, software, and development tools. And we really want the technology to fade away for both developers and players so that gamers have the most amazing and immersive experience on whatever device they choose to play on.
That's awesome. Rachel, let's go over to you. You have experience working with the governor of South Carolina, and you also led an indie video game studio. How has your background given you maybe a unique perspective as the product lead for Xbox Series X?
Hey, Brian, thanks for that. So I have a really unique background. And first, I think I would just like to acknowledge I feel very, very fortunate for the experiences that I've had, both in my education and in my professional roles. The red thread kind of across all those is that I've had the honor to work with really great people and do really great things. When I worked with the Indie Game Studio, when we formed that, it was really about building, amazing experiences for gamers, and really digging deep to understand what would delight them and what experiences they would love. It was also about getting sold on the value of entrepreneurial spirit and agility, and those skills I bring with me. To when I worked with the governor, that was really humbling. It was an awesome experience. We were on a personal mission, both of us, to increase job opportunities, to help a really difficult public education system in our beloved home state. And to my current role now, at Microsoft, it's our mission to strive to empower every person and every organization on the planet. And I think we're really fortunate to be in a position to help do that. And so for me, when I think about product, I'm grateful for my experiences, but really I'm most grateful for all of my team's experiences, because I think we all have very individual, unique experiences that shape the products we build. These products are a reflection of the team that built them. And we believe that in our core.
That's good. Now, Chris, let's finish with you real quick. You are a game designer by trade with over 25 years experience in the industry. Now, you've shipped titles like Forza Motorsport, Project Gotham Racing, Crackdown, I could go on. For those unfamiliar with the role of design and product development, would you mind elaborating a little bit?
Sure.
This is
happy
a
to.
developer show.
Really,
for
there's
sure.
there's two primary roles. One is for the customer, and that is purely to help galvanize a team to deliver something which is unexpectedly fun. And I use those words "unexpectedly fun" very purposefully, because frankly, when you're in an entertainment industry and you're making a game or you're playing that game, it's very challenging to beat the expectation that somebody has when they expect it to be fun. And so you're really trying to do something that delivers that little bit of extra unexpected fun where it makes people talk and they talk about your game. They're like, hey, wait, they did what? Oh, I wouldn't have expected they do that. I need to try that out. And it's really that last little bit of getting them something which they didn't expect, right? Like if you're going to go drive a Ferrari, you're going to expect to be fast, but you're not going to expect the guy next to you to, hit the button that busts out the booster rockets on it. And that's going to be the thing that you remember because you weren't expecting it, right? You were expecting it to be great. You're expecting it to be fast, but those booster rockets were the thing that took it over the top. And that's really what you're trying to do on the game, trying to take that player on a journey and make them feel something. And the second role for design really amongst the team, it's really regarded as the discipline that helps tie everything together into something pure, something very focused. Because there are times when, hey, there might be business questions at hand or tech questions or just design questions themselves. And designers are really the ones pinned to, hey, here's where this can go. Here's that vision. Here's if this thing didn't go right. Here's how we can pivot and still deliver an excellent customer experience. And in the end, whether you're an audio designer or game designer, combat designer, or UX designer, there's a bunch of different flavors. Your job is to deliver something focused, pure, and that takes the player on a journey and makes them feel something.
That's good. I feel like whenever I see design, we have this conversation all the time in the office, Chris. It's like good products start with good design. So I love having you on the panel. I think this is going to be a great conversation. So let's get started. Let's get at this. I know y'all have been waiting for this. Jason, let's kick off with you. There was some big news this week on Xbox Series X. Can you tell us how the technical advances allow developers to unlock new and innovative gaming experiences?
Absolutely. This has been a really exciting week for the team. The team's been working really hard on Xbox Series X since 2016, and to finally be able to actually share some of the details of what we've been working on has definitely been a highlight for all of us. And, as you mentioned on Monday, we shared many of the details of our next generation console, and it's really about enabling transformative gaming experiences that we've never seen in the living room. In the early days of the planning process, the design of the Xbox Series X was really directly influenced by three key principles. Like I mentioned before, first and foremost is developer and gamer feedback. When I was leading the Xbox Advanced Technology Group, the team worked closely with developers all across the world, making everything from the industry's best blockbusters to competitive esports titles to extremely innovative ideas in game design coming from some of the industry's best independent creators. And we really listened, learned, and helped them overcome the technology barriers that were really limiting their aspirations for the games that they were creating, whether that was in hardware, software, or even the developer tools that we provide. And then I think another key aspect of it as well is gamers are also demanding higher and more stable frame rates. So we challenge ourselves to not only build a system that could reliably deliver high-quality 4K game experiences at 60 frames a second, but we challenge ourselves to go even further and to deliver frame rates up to 120 frames a second, frame rates that historically you never thought were possible in the living room. So it was really about kind of pushing those boundaries and really understanding what developers and gamers were really looking for in a next generation console.
Thanksgiving 2020.
And then the second one is just really looking at the innovations in technology with an eye towards the future. Everything from advancements in CPU performance, more efficient usage of GPU, next generation graphics innovation and capabilities, things like hardware accelerated ray tracing or variable rate shading or mesh shaders. It's really about giving developers new kinds of tools to really build those rich, dynamic worlds that players like to spend time in. And another great example of that is with the current generation, we're basically at the upper bounds of what's possible with a traditional rotational drive technology. And it was really constraining the game design that developers were having, where they'd have to arbitrarily funnel players through different tunnels or pathways, or, you know, you'd have a fast travel system where it'd take a super long time to teleport from one side of the map to another. So, you know, with these insights, it was very clear that we would need to invest in things like SSD level I/O performance, or a revolutionary new architecture to make it easier for game developers and game engines to stream assets in real time from the storage solution into the memory and the CPU and the GPU, so that you can get that real rich, high fidelity, dynamic living world that players expect. And then I think the final principle, or the final thing that we really thought about in the very early days, was when you design a new console hardware platform, you're really setting the direction for gaming and game development for the next 7 to 10 years. So you really have to have a solid vision as to where you see game development going and the kinds of gaming experiences that players want to have. So as we looked into the future with new innovations like Project Xcloud and game streaming, we knew we had an opportunity to make key decisions in the design of the system that could open up brand new possibilities for developers. And like one thing that we learned very early on as we started working closely with the Azure team is some of the same challenges that we have in delivering a high performance game console in your living room are the same kinds of challenges that we have in the data center. Things such as delivering high performance for gaming workloads while minimizing power consumption and thermal management. And having that vision of a future really helped shape how we designed our custom SoC that's powering the Xbox Series X and the overall system architecture, so that we could make sure that we're providing a common and consistent hardware, software, and development platform that makes it easier for developers to bring the games that they're developing today on console and PC into the cloud in the future. And many of the technologies that we're innovating and incubating with the Xbox Series X are being brought to PC and brought to Project Xcloud. And it's because we designed the system with the future in mind from the very outset of the program.
Wow. Jason, this is blowing my mind. Like, having worked on the team for a while and kind of getting a chance to see what this thing looks like in person is kind of like shocking me right now. This is actually the first time I've actually I can't touch it. My fingerprints will get on it. It's one of those things like, this is amazing. I geek out about this all the time. And you said something that has really just like blown my mind a bit, which is like, this is like one of the first times we've built a console thinking about where the next generation, the next iteration, the next paradigm shift in game development's really going. And you talk about the cloud. Can you touch a bit on the role that the cloud plays as you're thinking about the development of Xbox Series X?
Sure. So, you know, there's certain scenarios, you know, this is a custom SoC, this is a custom architecture that we've designed from the ground up to make sure that we're delivering that high fidelity gaming experience. But as you think about things like the cloud and what we're doing with Project Xcloud, you know, there's certain things that, for example, virtualizing the display controller as an example. If we're just designing the system in such a way to make only a high-performing gaming console, that's an investment that you wouldn't make, or it's a design decision you wouldn't really think about. But you only really get one chance to make those decisions, and it's when you're designing the chip, when you're designing the overall system architecture. So as we think about how developers are going to take their games and move them into the cloud, or how they're going to be developing games in the cloud in the future, we knew we needed to invest in certain key technological investments from day one to make sure that we're providing a clear path for developers, so that developers don't actually have to go and like significantly alter their game or rewrite their game from scratch. We want to provide kind of a path as game streaming becomes much more prevalent and accessible. And ultimately, it's really about empowering developers to reach customers all across the world, whether they choose to own a console, they choose to play on a PC, or maybe streaming is going to be their primary experience. We want to provide that easy path for developers.
There's something you said, I have one more follow-up question on this, and this is something that like a lot of teams, a lot of people that may be watching this maybe just don't know, is the lead time that it takes in order to put together a console. Can you talk to us a little bit about, like, you mentioned making technology decisions of what the hardware is going to be in this box. It's not like, oh, it's 2 months from launch, let's just put this thing in there. Like, there's a whole process to that thinking. Can you elaborate just a little bit on just some of the work that it takes to kind of think through where this is going to be in time?
Sure. You know, we really started the development of Xbox Series X in 2016, before we'd even released the Xbox One X. So to your point on lead times, you know, it's multiple years of investigation, of prototyping, of trying to figure out where the technology roadmap's going, understanding from developers what their game design aspirations are. You know, there's entire new genres of games or new kinds of game experiences that, you know, have come up in the last 2 to 3 years. So a lot of it is really kind of that partnership with our development partners, both at Xbox Game Studios as well as the best creators all across the industry. But it's also making sure that we have a clear vision of where do we see gaming going as Team Xbox. And once again, you know, our goal is to get, Catherine mentioned earlier, you know, really reaching out to those 2 billion gamers all across the world. So it's like, how do we make it as easy as possible? And what are the investments that we need to be making so that customers all across the world can have the same great gaming experience that those of us who grew up gaming on consoles know and love today, and do it in such a way that makes it easy for developers.
That's good. I think that's a perfect segue as well. Let's dig into the next bit of this. We want to talk a little bit about Project Xcloud. And Catherine, I'm going to bring this next question to you. Would you mind talking us through the approach of Microsoft bringing Project Xcloud to market? And before you jump in, I actually am going to, everybody follow me on the camera. This is going to be fun. We're doing this in real time. I have a server blade over here from Project Xcloud that I also was so excited when I heard this was going to be here. This is an actual Project Xcloud server blade that is in the footprints of Azure at the global data center level, and it is so cool to take a look at the guts of this thing because, wow, like the tech that went into this, the making of this is unbelievably impressive. Catherine, back to the question. Walk us through Microsoft's approach in bringing Xcloud to market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Brian, when you just took off there, I had no idea where you were going. I was just like, well, where's he going now? But you're seeing our blade. And I mean, it is so cool. And it is, you know, Rachel said it earlier, our product's a testament to the amazing teams that build them. And, you know, looking at this, I just couldn't be more proud. So going back to what we believe the journey is, we think we are at the very beginning of a multi-year journey with streaming. You know, there is much more we don't know about streaming than we do know right now. And that's exactly why we came to market with our preview plan, where you'll remember, and it seems like an age ago now, but we started last October with just 4 games in preview. And since then, we've expanded countries. We have more than 90 games. We've gone just from Android. We have an iOS test flight running. And as we talked about before, we will also be bringing this to Windows 10 PCs. This really is about a journey of us learning together with the developer community, and to see the passion with which developers have leaned into this with us and the learnings that we're doing together has just been mind-blowing. It just makes me so proud to be a part of this team.
That's awesome. And you mentioned just a moment ago the response from some of the game development community. Can you share a little bit about, like, how has it been working with game developers? What have they been saying and building for Project Xcloud?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know what? I'm reminded actually back to a story. We spent a lot of time obviously talking with developers before we launched into preview. And every time we would go to a meeting with a developer, we would take their game running on a mobile phone and hand it to them to play. And at that point, there was always silence in the room, and we kind of would look around the room and think, well, what's going on? And then the partner would start sort of looking around the room and, you know, talking to their teams and saying, well, who worked on this? And it was very clear that no one had worked on it, because actually when you build for Xbox, you build for Xcloud. And what we had done is just made the game work automatically for them, really, and got it up and running pretty much in a matter of minutes. And that first stage, which we call lift and shift, literally taking a game that you've built for Xbox and putting it in the cloud, literally blew the developers away. So that's been absolutely fascinating. And then we've just learned, so much about how gamers are using streaming. And basically, we're seeing gamers play more across the board, which has been fascinating for developers. They're not just playing more on Xcloud, they're also playing more on Xbox and PC. And specifically, we're learning about different sort of genre types and what gamers who stream their games are enjoying perhaps more than others. So it really is a journey of us learning together. But we also are aware that there are some developers who want to be doing more to optimize their games for the cloud. And in those circumstances, we really talk about it as cloud aware. This is the work we're doing around touch controls to support native interaction, or some of the APIs that we're developing that provide device-side characteristics so that developers can optimize for the much smaller screen size. So as you can see, it's literally this symbiotic journey that we're on with our developers to really, begin to optimize this experience. When I talk to my team, I really talk about the speed of our learning cycles. Whenever you're bringing a new technology to market, it's all about learning. And the faster we learn, the better we're going to optimize this product. So that's absolutely the journey that we're on.
So good. I always remember when I'm sitting in rooms with you, one of the things you say is we always have to keep learning. We always have to keep improving. I feel like that's really an ethos that you've helped bring that along with the team, which is just so good. Chris, let's pivot over to you. As a service and platform provider, what do you think Microsoft's role is in helping game developers navigate new technologies like Xbox Series X and Project Xcloud?
Frankly, if it's two words, it's eliminating friction, right? I mean, the game teams have a vision for what they want to build, and really as a publisher, your job is to let them just execute on that and multiply the effort against it. And there are things that sometimes are tricky to manage when you're a studio, right? Large or small. Sometimes business questions come up, and you want to sell things in a different way, and the publisher does or doesn't support that. And so it's how do you push that and work with the publisher to get them to offer things in a different way. Sometimes it's technology. Hey, there's this new tech, we don't quite know what to do with it, or we have something and we want you to push it even farther. I mean, when I think about both Xcloud and the Series X, right? More so than the GPU, as a game designer, the game designs that you can build because you have a much more powerful CPU is actually super interesting, because that's, for a while now, we've been able to make graphics and worlds that look very real. But the challenge, frankly, from a game loop, from a game dynamics perspective, is how do you make those worlds act real, right? Physics and AI and doing all of that math actually requires a CPU that's pretty strong. And so when you think about kind of the typical trade-offs that you've had in games in the past, where, hey, I can have, a small number of enemies that are really, really smart, or a large number of enemies that are not so smart, grunts. That's always been a trade-off that's limited what you can do in the games. And from the fastest thing to make a developer laugh is, as a designer, you go into a room and you tell them that you want to build a scene where you're fighting in water, and you have a bunch of these enemies, and everything reacts dynamically to things getting wet, right? They just look at you and they're like, yeah, we can't do the physics for that. Like, you need a CPU with some power to do that. And so moving forward on something like Series X and in the cloud, and understanding, hey, this isn't just going to be something where it's going to look much better. It's going to make that world feel and sound much more real. We're going to allow you to do much better things with physics, like simulations. Like, those are the things that are going to allow games to take a giant step forward. And that's really what I'm excited to do. And as a publisher, I mean, there's certainly the bread and butter work we do, helping people understand the research that we've done into different regions. If they want to know a customer that they're not familiar with in a different part of the globe, understand what their data pipeline and bandwidth is like in that region, understand where we think the technology is going, understand the shell experiences that we're going to build that are basically the stage for their title, right? Like, they're building this pearl, and we're this oyster to showcase that pearl. And really the publisher's job is how do you eliminate friction so that the game teams can just run at what they're really good at, and we could help support them with things that they shouldn't have to care about, right? They shouldn't have to care about building tools to allow them to look at how to optimize their engine and what's going on in picks, right? That shouldn't be their job. They shouldn't have to worry about building giant data centers across the planet, right? That should be our job. We can go do that. They should focus on the game and what's going to make it great. And so, simply put, hey, how do we just make it easier for them and allow them to turn things up?
That's good. And you mentioned, as you're talking through this idea of this awareness. And I think it's really interesting to talk about what it means to have your game be aware. And I hear you guys talk about this idea of the streaming aware point of view. Maybe Jason, can you maybe elaborate a little bit on what does it mean to be streaming aware, building a game streaming aware?
Yeah, so like Catherine was talking about, today with Project Xcloud, we're kind of doing what we call lift and shift, which is taking existing games that were already designed and built for Xbox and being able to run them in the cloud with the title not even really being aware that it's running in a remote data center. But I think there's a lot of power and I think there's a lot of opportunity if the title actually knows whether or not it's being streamed or not. And in this case, we enabled console streaming on the Xbox One today. It's the same technology. Like if you're actually streaming from either your local console, you're streaming from Project Xcloud, what would you actually change in your game? So Catherine used the example of, if I know that my game is actually streaming down to a mobile device, maybe I originally designed my HUD or my UI for a 10-foot user experience on a large screen TV, but when I'm actually streaming it to a mobile device, maybe I actually need to simplify the UI or increase the font size so it's more legible and easier to read. You also think about situations like multiplayer. Like many multiplayer systems are designed with this notion of network latency and how do I keep people together? Well, if you knew that all your game sessions were actually all running in the same physical data center, you don't have to worry about ping times. You don't have to worry about network latency. And one of the technologies that we announced earlier this week is dynamic latency input, or DLI. Not only did we build that so that we will have the most precise and responsive input possible. If you're playing a game in your living room, say it's a competitive esports game, or it's a game that's running at 120 frames a second, where input latency really matters. But that same technology will also be available in Project Xcloud to allow a developer to actually measure their end-to-end input latency so they can actually optimize or customize the input experience when they're actually streaming to a mobile device versus when you have a controller in your hands, as an example. So once again, when we really think about the continuum and how do we bring these things together, as we design and incubate and innovate in these various technology arenas, it's really about putting the power and the control in the developers' hands because they know what's best for their players and the game worlds that they're creating. And it's our job to provide the best platform possible so that they can deliver on that creative vision.
Wow. So good. So good. I want to take that and I want to turn the question a little bit. And Rachel, let's go over to you for a bit. This week, there's a lot of news coming out from gaming companies. And thinking about how people are positioning hardware and cloud platforms, it's starting to feel like the story is becoming this either-or narrative. In 2020, Microsoft's going to release both Project Xcloud and Xbox Series X. Now, Rachel, would you mind sharing a little bit about what is Microsoft's thinking behind this?
Yeah, Brian, I'm happy to. As we've mentioned, gamers and developers are truly at the center of everything we do. And for gamers, our vision is for them to be able to play the games they want with the people they want, wherever they want. And we know that our partnerships with developers are key to delivering on this mutual goal that we have. So we're taking our cues from gamers, from developers. And as Catherine mentioned, it is valuable for us to get these learnings and to constantly be learning about that. We know that gamers want more games, they want to play with more people, and they are playing on more devices around the world. And we know that developers are continually pushing boundaries, trying to reach more gamers around the world who are playing on more devices and more platforms. And so the Xbox Series X was really built for this evolving landscape of gamers playing on multiple devices, but also this thing that we're seeing happening with technology converging across console, PC, and cloud. We want both gamers and developers to feel unconstrained in this next generation of gaming. And so we are working with developers to unlock the potential for what we can develop and deliver to gamers together. And so more specifically from a developer perspective, Jason touched on some of this in his previous comments. We're really aiming to build hardware that unleashes their creative vision. We're empowering them to create how they want because they know what's best for them. And we're providing the tools they need for now and for the future. So this enables them to get their games to more gamers around the world, to more Xbox gamers around the world, whether they're playing on Series X, on PC, or Xcloud. I think it kind of sums it up, the question you ask about, either or. We believe that the best experience for gamers and developers is the experience that's designed from day one, so it's better together. So I think you could kind of say our philosophy is an and philosophy. It's not an or philosophy. We will lead with the flagship experience on our next-gen console, and we will extend that to players who want to play on Xcloud.
You said something that's super important, which is this idea of better together. And I think that is like a theme within just Microsoft and Microsoft Game Stack. It's this idea that it's not an or statement, but it's an and statement, letting game developers really bring the tools that they're familiar with and then be able to work with the stuff they love from Microsoft. So I really like that. I'm curious, Catherine, this idea of better together, working on Project Xcloud and Xbox Series X, from a cloud perspective, what are your thoughts on this better together story?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm so pleased you called on me, Brian, because I was dying to add one thing to what Rachel said, which was so perfect. It's really about this idea of choice, playing your games wherever you choose to play them. And we just had such a great story come in the other week from one of our preview testers. He's actually in the armed forces and he's currently deployed. And he couldn't take his Xbox with him. But he gets to play Destiny 2 through the Xcloud preview. And I just think that is so absolutely perfect. And, and really speaks to reaching people wherever they are. And then I also want to go sort of one point further with that, because, we talked earlier about reaching the 2 billion gamers. That demands, both looking to the Xbox world as we know it, but also what we call TAM expansion, the total addressable market that we can expand to. And, as within preview, one of the markets we'll be coming to is India, where India is a huge gaming nation today. I think, in fact, I read somewhere that it's, got the 5th most highly engaged gamer population. However, it's a market that we at Xbox don't know so well. So that is so fascinating as we work with developers to say, how can we bring these great games that we're building to new markets and new opportunities? And I really think that fits with the better together, that we take what we have and we bring it to new places and new people and new endpoints. So it just couldn't be a more exciting time to be part of Team Xbox.
Yeah, and it's like there's this whole kind of world where it's all coming together. And Chris, I almost want to ask the same question to you, is like, when you think about it from the design perspective, building better together is not simple anymore, just because you're having to deal with so many different endpoints and so many different customers and so many different games. Talk to a little bit about what is the role of design in this idea of thinking about multiple products, multiple platforms, multiple networks?
Well, to Catherine and Rachel's point around choice, when you look at it from the player's perspective, players love games. What would they choose to do if you handed them a time travel device, right? Which is effectively what you do when you give somebody a cellular phone, right? Or something that they can take with them. Because they can't always sit in front of their PC or their laptop or their console to play the game that they so desperately want to play, right? People get tattoos of their favorite games, right? This is what they want to do, bar all else. And when they find themselves, physically standing in a line somewhere for 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 hours, however long it's going to be, their mind is often on that game. And what better than have their mind on that game, but to actually give them that wormhole, give them that tunnel so that they can spend that 5 minutes or that 15 minutes, whatever it might be, interacting with the game they want to play. And sometimes, through Xcloud, it's actually playing it. Sometimes it's through things like Mixer, what they're doing to watch it. And it's really design's role to allow you, sometimes you want to play, sometimes you want to talk about that game with your friends. If you have a device with you or around you throughout the day, what role do those devices serve? And design's job is to make sure that it's helping people connect to the content and to the people that they want to play that content with as often as they can, right? As often as they choose to, because that player choice, right? Physically, if I'm standing in that line and checked out, okay, cool. I want to play a game. I want to talk about that game. And if you give me a 4-minute window to do it, amazing, I'm in. And so on the, certainly on the developer side, you think about, well, hey, what does it mean to build something that allows you to play for a shorter amount of time, or to play continuously kind of throughout the day in small segments of time, not just for an hour or 6 hours that you're going to spend sitting in front of your console or your PC. And that's really what's amazing, right? When you talk about Better Together, it's about how do you give people the choice to participate in the thing that they love more often. And share that with more people. And certainly that was the goal that we set out to accomplish. And Better Together really just means being super attuned to letting gamers get closer to the thing that they love.
I want to give a plug real quick for some content that we had that was pre-done before the show taped. And it was this Xcloud talk that we have up on our on-demand site. So if you go to aka.ms/GameStackLive and you check out some of the Xcloud content that's up on our YouTube page on demand, there's some fascinating stuff that's going on around the team and how they think about building for the platform. And Chris, I almost just want to ask a real quick follow-up on, which is like, with regards to design itself, what are some of the challenges when trying to design a UI or a UX that can map across multiple devices?
Oh, there's a lot. For the user, I mean, there's literally like, hey, what's the type ramp and how do you make it work in multiple locations? Whether the angular pixel density is different on a 10-foot screen than on something that's, a foot or two in front of you, right? There's a bunch of just kind of technical details related to design. But really, when you think about what that UI is there to do, it's there to help connect you. And so the thing that might be appropriate in terms of, hey, I want to play right now, and this is how I want to interact with the game I love, is actually something different. And you might want to present more of a social view into that thing when you're looking at it on a cell phone in a short amount of time, because that's actually going to be the thing that then sets you up to play later in depth with your friends, right? It's how do you catalyze that group of people to get together. And when we talk to gamers, the number one thing that they say is, hey, I wish I could spend more time gaming. I just don't have enough time. And it's even harder for me to find crossover time with my friends to play together, right? That's the problem that they would love help solving. And so from a UI perspective, there's literally, how do you make this, this UI look good on a different endpoint, and what do I need to take into account from a design perspective? But it's also, what should I be showcasing to the user? Because it might not be that they want to play right now. It might want to be that they are catalyzing a group to get together to play later tonight. And so having your UI have an understanding of what a player has been doing across your game is really, really important, because then you can showcase that even within the game. Hey, we noticed you just finished, how are you going to get on later tonight or this weekend?
This is going to be probably my last haircut for
those
quite
are
a
two
while,
independent things, but they're very much both in design's wheelhouse to try and fix. And I think when you think about the ecosystem that you're attached to moving forward, design is going to be increasingly focused on how do I get players access to the right thing at the right time, at the right moment. Because certainly our job is to take care of things like the type ramp, so that when you're looking at fonts on a cell phone when they've been streamed, that they're actually as appropriate there as they were on a 10-foot screen, right? That's just stuff we need to take care of.
Awesome. Well, let's take that conversation a little bit and let's go a little bit more into our journey with developers. Now, Jason, this is a question for you. Given this is a year that we're shipping both a console and a streaming platform, I'm curious, Jason, what is the approach Microsoft has taken in the journey of working with game developers? And then, Catherine, we're going to also ask you the same question, so hang tight.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny because Catherine and I often do this together, because we really don't talk to or engage with developers just on console or just on Project Xcloud or what we're doing with PC as an example. We really kind of talk to developers and lay out kind of our vision for the future and how we can help them deliver on the experiences that they want to provide to their players. So that means a consistent hardware platform between what's happening in the console ecosystem and what's happening in the game streaming side. It's a common software platform, common APIs. The vast majority majority of the code that game developers actually write should be reusable across the cloud, across the console, across PC. So as we've updated our API designs and our app model, we've really designed it so that it can work across multiple devices. And then really where we want developers to spend their time is focus on their game, making their game experience great so that players have a great experience, and then really kind of tailoring it to the unique capabilities of how they choose to deliver it. You know, simple things such as if I'm playing on a console, clearly I'm going to, prioritize or lead with controller-based input. But if the same game is being played on a PC, keyboard and mouse is critically important. Or maybe in a Project Xcloud scenario, it's more about touch controls or making it easier for a player to play there. So, it's actually been one of the highlights for me over the last 3 to 4 years is as we've been developing these plans, as we've and challenging the teams internally on kind of this next generation and how we think about gaming and game development is going out and actually talking to the partners and hearing their feedback, telling them here's where we see things are going, getting the feedback directly from them, and then adjusting and altering our plans. Because at the end of the day, we all just want those same great gaming experiences. And as Rachel and Chris and Catherine have said, it's really about making sure that the players all across the world can have these same great gaming experiences and doing it in such a way that we make it as easy as possible for developers.
That's awesome. And I almost want to touch on that again, too. You said something that was really interesting about working with developers. And it's this idea of we have all of these developers who are coming and watching GameStack Live right now and are participating in their Discord channel, following us on Twitter. For folks that are not currently working with Microsoft today and they're wanting to think about, the next generation of hardware, the next generation of streaming, what are some advice, some tips that you give in hey, this is what we've experienced working with game developers today. Here's some ideas of how to think about that. Maybe, Jason, you could start there, and then Catherine, we're going to come over to you.
Sure. I think the core of it is honestly just keep building games the way that you always have been building games. If you're building a game on PC today, we've made it very easy to take a PC code base and get it running on console or getting it running in the cloud. We partner very closely with all the industry's leading middleware providers and engine providers to make sure that they're optimized to take full advantage of what we deliver, whether it's hardware capabilities or some of the services that we have with Xbox Live and Azure PlayFab. And it's really about the part that's really exciting about this industry, and part of the reason why I love this industry is it's the marrying of creativity and technology. And that's the thing that the game developers all across the world, whether it's, the largest studios working on a AAA blockbuster or small, super creative independent creators, it's about the creativity and it's about the worlds that you want to create and the experiences that you want to deliver to players. And it's our job at Team Xbox to really remove the technology and make the technology fade away in the background. And developers are just really focused on creating that immersive experience that players want to spend time in.
That's good. Catherine, how would you say the same thing? What are your experiences and what are your thoughts on how a game developer should think about building for this next generation of hardware, building for this next generation of streaming?
Yeah, I'm just going to start. Jason said it so beautifully. We often go out together and exactly what just happens. Jason just says it so beautifully that I just kind of need to go, it's what he said. But I'll try and add to that in that, as we talked about before, this first step of the journey that we think we're on is what we're calling lift and shift. It's the convenience of developing for the Xbox that then magically works in the cloud. And that's a really important first step. And then Jason took us through it earlier, and I also talked to some of the touch controls and APIs we're building around sort of providing more information about whether the game is streaming. And that is the next piece, which is the cloud aware piece, which just allows us to optimize games. An important point that we probably haven't touched on so far, but is absolutely something that we're thinking about, is this concept of what we're calling cloud native games. These are games that no longer just use the resources of the local device, but harness the full power of the cloud. And it's so fascinating. Before the world got stopped by the coronavirus, I had an incredible trip to Japan and Korea, meeting with ton of developers, and so fascinating to see how people were leaning in to really understanding how the cloud could actually change the process of development, the iteration of development, where teams sat to develop, as well as then, and I think it was Chris who mentioned it earlier, this idea of frictionless play, and therefore what that meant for the numbers of people who could play together, or even some of the business models and monetization of games. And what we're really seeing here is just creativity unleashed. As Jason just said, it's our job to put the technology somewhere behind so that others can just leverage it. And our vision is for developers to be able to really leverage the true power of the cloud. And we're not just seeing this excitement with some of our larger developers. It's incredible the support we've had from Chris Charler's ID at Xbox program and the indie developers. And our message to those developers is really clear. We just want you to focus on your games and your gameplay. Don't worry about porting it to other platforms. We're going to take care of that. Between the console and the cloud, we're going to take care of that for you. And so that's what I think is so exciting about this period. And that's the energy we get as we meet with developers, is that this period is about literally this unleashing of creativity, and that can only be great for gamers.
So something that not a lot of people outside of Microsoft get a chance to hear, which is just like some of the high-level thinking, some of the philosophies behind why we're doing this. Catherine, could you maybe touch on just for a second of like, where do we see this all going? We always talk about how we want to put the gamer at the center. We want to make sure that they can play the games they want on the devices they want with the people they want. Like, how does this all kind of play into the larger mission at Microsoft?
Yeah, no, well, I don't know that I can speak to the larger mission of Microsoft, but I can certainly speak to how we view the vision as a team, which is
Twitter, bro.
It's all about ubiquity. Your game should be available to play on any device at any point that you choose to play it. And the community and all your saves and everything else related to the game just comes with you. I mean, think about it. We've seen this in video. You can watch your Netflix, I mean, I personally choose, and everybody scoffs at me, but I personally choose to watch most of my movies on my phone. But obviously you can watch it on any device that you choose. And I really think this concept of ubiquity is absolutely key. It's about reaching every platform. And it's about us, for developers, as I said before, really leveraging the cloud, and through our partners with Azure, which is, as we know, one of the world's leading clouds with huge geographical footprint, to really allow us to reach gamers who previously it was much harder for us to reach with this fidelity of games. So that's really our high-level vision.
That's good. And, I think in talking with a lot of the developers, especially as they're starting to kind of get to that next stage, one of the questions that, I think a lot of people who are not necessarily engaged with Microsoft today around Xbox Series X or Project Xcloud is, for developers who are sitting on the fence, maybe, Rachel, if you could answer, like, what would you say to a developer who's kind of like looking at this technology and saying, like, I don't know, when's the right time to get involved?
I think it's a lot of what Catherine and Jason touched on. Jump in, right? I think back to when we started our indie game studio, seems like a lifetime ago. There were 3 of us. We didn't know what we didn't know, and that actually enabled us to go do really awesome things. And for us at Team Xbox, we truly love hearing those ideas and seeing what developers can create, because we're not going to tell you what to do, and we shouldn't tell you what to do. You're going to tell us, right? And so if I, put myself in, my own shoes a long time ago, I won't age myself. I think it would just be jump in, right? Jump in, work with us, reach out to us. Help us learn what we don't know. Help us figure out that, to reduce that friction, to help you be able to deliver those creative visions, especially as we think about, developing for both console and cloud. The cloud space is so exciting. I don't think we even know what that's going to look like. I always talk to the team about, watching my children play. They play together. They're on multiple devices. They're constantly going back and forth between devices. And it's where their friends are is where they go. I think when we think about the opportunity across all these platforms and all these devices, that's what Xbox wants to bring to developers, the ability to reach gamers where we see them going. And so jump in.
That's good. So let's talk real quick about some of the key learnings that we've gotten from development partners during the work that we've done to build out Xbox Series X and Project Xcloud. I always love the fact of it's great to hear what's going well. What are some challenges that people just have in general building for the cloud and building for new technology? Jason, let's go to you.
Sure. So I think one of the things that's exciting about the transition of a generation is what you used to think of previously as constraints, many times they go away. I mentioned the I/O system and the fact that we're at the upper bounds of what's possible with a rotational drive. Now that that's no longer a barrier, it opens up all these new possibilities, but then all of a sudden we're going to discover kind of some of the next challenges. It's like now I have almost, kind of unlimited memory and I can feed it into the system, but now all of a sudden, certain limitations we previously counted on no longer exist. And I think that challenges a lot of preconceived notions. So I think there's that. And I think the other thing too is just, there's times where there's a member of the team who she mentioned, with Xbox One X, it was like getting a playground to play with. And then with something like Xbox Series X, now the team has an entire amusement park to play with. So it can be a little bit overwhelming to actually figure out, where do I want to invest? What are these new opportunities that I have? So I think the real guidance that I'd give to developers in the community out there is, challenge yourselves, think creatively. What is the gaming experience you always wanted to build? And, a little bit to what we've talked about throughout today, if there's ever something where, the software is not enabling you to do it, or the development tools would be more useful if they did this, or my iteration time needs to improve, we want that feedback. We need that feedback. We absolutely listen to that feedback, and it fundamentally shifts the direction that we go. So we listen very closely to the gaming community. We're all gamers ourselves. We all play on Xbox Live almost every day. We have family members that we play with and we connect with. But it's also true with developers as well. We want to know where we've gotten it right. We want to know where you're struggling. And it's our challenge then is to take that feedback and go away and come up with really creative solutions that meets the needs of the development community so that you guys can just focus on delivering that amazing gaming experience that all of us can't wait to actually play.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. All right, I think we're getting tight on time, so we're going to do what's called the lightning round. We have a set of questions we're going to ask every single person here. What are the most important things for a game developer to take away from this conversation today? Rachel, let's start with you.
Okay, I'll try to be super quick since you said we're tight on time. I think my hope is that one of the biggest takeaways from today is a feeling of excitement. As we've mentioned, we're in the midst of something, very crazy, unprecedented going on in the world. There's a lot of heaviness. I hope that anybody listening, whether it was a developer, a gamer, maybe a student who's supposed to be doing remote learning, that they feel that light inside of them, that they feel that passion that we all have for gaming. I hope they're excited about the future, excited about our next gen hardware and software, excited about how we can do things together and the things we're going to build together to reach gamers around the world so that they can play, watch, communicate, and create together.
That's good. That's good. Chris, let's go over to you. What is the most important thing a game developer should take away from this conversation?
I was really hoping to talk about what we've learned in relation to input and skill ceiling, right? Like if you tell everybody, hey, we're going to pack a stadium of people to go watch tic-tac-toe, that wouldn't be the case because the world championship of tic-tac-toe is going to be boring because there's no skill ceiling, right? It always comes out as a tie. And as we've gone down this route and looked at what the new generation of people growing up learning how to use play games on glass natively, which is different than certainly how I grew up, playing games on mouse and keyboard and with the controller. People can play games on glass to a degree and a fidelity which allows a skill ceiling, which is actually pretty incredible. And it was, 2 years ago when we kicked off our journey looking at that. I didn't think that was going to be the case. And now that we've looked at it, both on the customer side and what the best kind of game developers on the planet are doing, people are really solving the skill problem or the skill ceiling problem So when you think about pushing a game out, I would not be worried about thinking about a phone perhaps as the lowest common denominator. Be confident that you can actually make the game that you've built originally, when you were thinking about a PC or a console, you can make that skill ceiling, you can make that thing excellent, no matter where it's being streamed to.
That's good. All right, Catherine, let's go to you. What is the most important thing that a developer can take away from this conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say is, look, embrace the new, be open to learning, and don't constrain your thinking by frameworks that have existed in gaming previously. I think we're in a period where we are rewriting the rules of traditional game development, and I think that's such an exciting period with huge opportunity. And the only way that we can really, leverage that is by being open to any amount of possibilities and just increasing those learning cycles. So be open to the new. That's my main takeaway.
That's good. And Jason, what is the most important thing a developer can take away from today's conversation?
It's kind of funny. I'm like Catherine. Everybody else said it so eloquently. I don't know how much more I can add. I guess the only thing that I would add to what everybody else has really talked about is just focus on the player, focus on the gamer. Just really focus on how can you delight that player. The need to play is just a fundamental human condition. And that's why I think many of us work in this industry and we love this industry because at the end of the day, our job is to create fun and there's nothing better to do. And so as long as you're focusing on the player, we're here to help in any way that we can. We want the feedback from the community, both players and developers. But as long as you're focusing on the player, I don't think you can really go wrong.
That's good. Man, so good. Well, thank you guys so very much for joining over the phone. It has been an awesome chance to talk with this. That's it for us. Malik, Kelly, over to you.
Oh, he took the console. Oh, anyway. Thanks, Brian. Well, Kelly, if you wanted to know more about next-gen hardware and what it can do in the cloud, we can all cross that off the list right now.
Indeed. I could not be more excited, and that was such a great conversation. What do you guys think? And Malik, what do you think?
What do I think? Yeah. I think this is an exciting period in time. Next-gen hardware, Xbox Series X, coming out this year, holiday 2020.
You can't just say it as an Xbox Series X.
All right, guys.
That's true. Anyway, bro. Oh, sorry, you're right.
I don't see anything.
Xbox Series X.
Join me on play
so
Xbox
everyone
Live
out there, head over to our Discord and let us know what you think about it and tell us about all the things Xbox Series X and Xcloud, which I'm super excited about. In any event, in fact, we've got some teams from some of our favorite games in chat as well.
That's right, like Age of Empires. I'm so excited. That's actually my favorite game of all time, Age of Empires 2 specifically. Yeah. It's a great game. It actually caused me to kind of get into gaming and to do what I do right now.
I'm gonna hop out of here. I'll see you guys later this evening.
Isn't that a thing?
Wooloo.
Wooloo.
Yes, thank you. You were close.